Given the anniversary of the D-Day landings in 1944 on June 6th, I wanted to make a little mini-series for you, where besides the day-to-day events from June 1, I wanted to show you what the Allies actually were facing. Now, you have all heard of the bunkers, the machine guns, the mines, and you have all seen Saving Private Ryan a million times, I'm sure. But do you really know what the places were behind the pictures of the broken guns? What did the Germans actually build? How and what was their plan? Over the next couple of weeks, I will show you from the ground as I visited some of the more interesting parts of the Atlantic Wall, or rather, the fortified strongpoints along the coast. On paper, the German strength position looked good, with roughly 1 million men, 900,000 of them combat troops, for the defense of Western Europe. But they also had 2,400 kilometers of coastline to defend, with 58 divisions in the west, and 4 armies, 2 army groups B and G, one commanded by Rommel, the other by Blaskowitz. Many of these were by 1944 significantly depleted. A German division typically had 15,000 men, now only had 6 battalions, some of these padded by Osttruppen, whereas in 1939 they would have had 9. And many of these were static divisions. Germany now basically mirrored that of pre-World War II French troop depositions by placing a string of defenses which could be defended by older or lesser trained convalescent troops, defending more with less men and material, the concept behind the Maginot Line. And I want to show you exactly what it was the Germans did for the defense of Normandy. What exactly was the Allies facing when they crossed the Channel? You've all seen these photos of the select bunkers, you've heard the exploits on the beaches, and you know of the logistic success of the pre-invasion assembly of masses of material, and it was. But do you really know how the German defenses worked? What these individual points of resistance were, how they fought, and how they ended? Well, in this little Normandy series, I will show you. In return, I hope you'll consider subscribing to my channel, liking, follows, and maybe even join me on Patreon to help out. I am just a guy, a historian, traveling around all these historic places in Europe on my own dime, trying to bring them to you. The German strategy for the defense of Normandy in 1944 was designed to repel an anticipated Allied invasion of Western Europe. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel empathized a forward defense to stop the invasion at and on the beaches, supported by fortified bunkers, gun positions, artillery. However, the German strategy was not unified. Von Rundstedt was favoring allowing the landing, then rushing a heavy counterattack and destroy them on the beaches. So you already had a general conflict of defensive aims and tactics. That was a problem. But for now, I will focus on Rommel's task in that of creating defenses to his aim of denying a landing in the first place. He had seen at first hand how Allied air power dominated and had haunted him towards the end in Africa, and he knew the Allied here would have air supremacy. And thus, during daylight, it would become impossible to move, thus the assets had to be in place when an invasion would begin, and hit the Allies at the most vulnerable. He wanted the supreme defense, and preferable the German tank corps, in place to counterattack immediately. Also, Rundstedt wanted the armor far inland in a central place from where they could deploy in the directions of the landings, preparing for defense in depth. This would prove to be a serious problem, as it turned out. For the concepts of construction of their defenses and the overall defensive plan, I will focus on Normandy's fortifications, the bunkers, gun positions, the artillery. Especially, we will visit Pointe du Hoc, Massy, Lons-sur-Mer, Kriesbeck, and Asville as typical points of defense at that time and place. Some of these were rather simplistic, and others the most modern in German defensive concepts at the time. The defense of Normandy would fall under Army Group B, led by Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, with the 7th Army under General Friedrich Dollmann responsible for the region. The 352nd and the 716th Infantry Division, supported by Kriegsmarine artillery units, who manned key positions. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt was the commander, CNC West. The German 15th Army was the strongest unit in France, but due to the Allied deception, it was stationed in Pas-de-Calais, which was very, very well prepared, however. Now, two things need to be remembered. Only 20% of the planned defenses had been completed, and the Germans had a significant deficit in manpower due to the Russian front situation. With that in mind, the way the Germans constructed the defenses was done in stages. After the Battle of France was over, planning for defending the gained territory now began. The first suitable landing places was identified. Thereafter, the Germans placed anything which could hurl a projectile around that place in open positions. French, Czech cannons, even guns from World War I, anything. Even steel domes from the Maginot Lines were put in place, or French tank turrets were put in stationary bunkers. After that, as resources would become available, both modern weaponry, cement, steel, the positions would be built up gradually, bunker by bunker, cement-reinforced trench, firing stand, ringstand by ringstand. Each established key position for defense would be upgraded every year. Now remember, this was across the entire 2,400-kilometer frontier. You often has heard that this or that German position was still under construction when it was attacked. This was the case. Construction plans and resources had already been allocated for 1945 and on. So one thing is that what the Allies actually attacked, another is what they would have attacked a month or a year later. But a standard disposition would be, first the Germans would identify a point to defend. This would be a place it would be easy or conceivable for the Allies to land an invasion force. Then they would place 4 of the heaviest guns they could find, preferably over 10 centimeters, place them first in open positions. They then started building crew bunkers. Then flak guns would come, munition bunkers, and so on. Then the guns would be encased, if possible, and the trenches run between all of these, whereafter the trenches would then be covered themselves, followed by more guns, mines, barbed wire. Rommel would order placements of millions of mines along the coast, and also Rommel's asparagus, as they were called, which was heavy wooden stakes to impale or impede gliders, and underwater obstacles, hedgehogs, Belgian gates to block landing crafts. Most of the coastal batteries were 155mm, 150 or 105mm guns, and of course lots and lots of machine gun nests with MG-34s or 42s, and even some Maxims captured by the French, placed into brooks. These were positioned to create overlapping fields of fire as well as mutual support. Now, the strong points, Widerstandsnest, are those interesting positions or strong points I want to focus on and show you. And for a moment, remember the centralized forts of pre-World War I, the Brelmont forts, for instance, where a relatively small area was fenced in, big guns placed in the center, machine guns on the perimeter for defense. I've showed you lots of these over the years, but for a minute keep that concept in mind. Now, key positions like Macy or Pointe du Hoc was organized as resistance nests, combining artillery, infantry, anti-aircraft defenses, and to hold out against assaults until reinforcements arrived. Each of these strong points were semi-autonomous, with bunkers, trenches, supplies, and munition to withstand prolonged attacks or even sieges. That sounds a lot like the World War I forts, doesn't it? Now imagine a string of those along the coast, and you get the picture. Of course, you insert tons and landmines and AA guns everywhere as well. Normandy was not a string of bunkers, but a string of strong points. Now, of course, the Germans would also use deception fake gun positions, fake steel domes. I'll show you one of those later. Famously, how we all now know that the guns of Point du Hoc, short of one, had been replaced by wooden logs. Now the Luftwaffe had problems. They were severely weakened by 1944, although the production of aircraft was up, the delivery of fuel was down. And with only 319 aircraft available in France on D-Day, versus the roughly 10,000 Allied planes, anti-aircraft guns, 88s and 20mm flak mostly, at batteries like the Mécy and 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐫𝐞 were critical, and they did take their toll on Allied ground attack aircraft. But with that kind of numbers, camouflage was one of the last keys to survival, and some of the German positions were exceptionally well camouflaged, either as buildings or to blend in with nature. I'll show you examples of this, and some of that would fool Allied interpreters of aerial reconnaissance. Now, all of the positions I will show you was known by Allied intelligence, and all of them were bombed leading up to D-Day and on the night of. However, when the ships arrived, they were all operational. Some of them lasted until the 9th or 10th of June, so they could certainly take punishment well, despite of their bombing. At 5:30 a.m., batteries like 𝐶𝐨𝐵𝐿, 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐫𝐞, and Mécy opened fire on Allied ships, with Point du Hoc's guns already having been relocated inland. The German alarm was raised after 𝐶𝐨𝐵𝐿's rangefinder spotted the fleet. The German construction concept for Normandy's defenses was standardized under the Todt organization, 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐫𝐞, standardized bunker design to create resilient, interconnected strongpoints that were simple to construct. A heavy crew shelter could be constructed in about a week, for instance. In this way, the commander of a section or a fortress could submit plans for his expansion for the following year. For instance, if he would like to build 4 more Tobruks for close defense, he would like to encase his guns, and like to build 2 more reinforced crew shelters, he would submit this to the organization Todt after approval by his higher-ups, and the organization Todt would know exactly how much cement and wood and rebar they would have to send him. The construction crews would know exactly how long it would take to build, and exactly how long it would take for the cement to dry before they could move on to the next evolution. This was incredibly smartly done, and incidentally some of the wooden barracks were also standardized, like a huge fortified IKEA catalog. In many of the Western occupied countries, it was quite normal for Organization Todt or the German army itself to hire local workers or local construction companies to aid in their building programs. However, they were apprised of the concept of the French resistance, thus especially in France they would try to not use French contract workers in order to maintain secrecy and prevent the resistance from leaking, bombing, or destroying their work site. So they would use many Soviet, Polish, Czech prisoners for that labor construction, or even German workers brought over from Germany. And then, of course, there was the problem of bombing disruption. With a large number of the AA guns now having to be placed in Germany proper to defend against Allied air raids, and the Air Force in general being placed in Russia, where 80% of all German assets were at any given time, the Allies' air forces would gradually take over, and bombing raids would take place the minute they would discover something interesting was being constructed. However, in April alone, over 1,000 tons of bombs was dropped on Point du Hoc alone. And yet, the one gun left there behind found on D-Day was operational. Also, there was severe lack of materials, which delayed construction and reinforcement, leaving many of the guns along the coast still in open emplacements. The earliest construction phases from 1941 to 42 would focus on site selection and basic fortifications, such as the coastal cliffs of Point du Hoc, 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐫𝐞, and the inland rises of Mécy and 𝐼𝐸𝐴𝐵𝐿. They were chosen for the strategic advantages. Open emplacements for guns, like 155mm at Point du Hoc, or 105 at 𝐼𝐸𝐴𝐵𝐿, and the initial trenches were constructed here using forced labor. For example, the 𝐶𝐨𝐵𝐿 began with open pits for 2 10mm guns, with foundations laid later in 1941. Then in 42-43, the main phases, the 𝐟𝐫𝐫𝐞 casemates of the H671, M272, and R683 were constructed to protect the guns, with concrete pouring prioritized for the key batteries. Fire control bunkers were also added for precise targeting, such as at 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐫𝐞. The extensive trench networks. At 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐫𝐞 there's 2.5 miles of it. 𝐟𝐨𝐫𝐞 had 1 kilometer of covered trenches by the war's end. And defensive features, lots of Tobruks and minefields, were also expanded, of course. And then there was the camouflage. It became extremely critical as Allied air raids increased. 𝐬𝐮𝐬's netting and Point-de-Hoek's decoys were implemented. In 43-44, which became the final phase, Rommel's inspection tours, late 43, accelerated fortification efforts, adding beach obstacles and reinforcing batteries further. However, material shortage and bombing halted much progress. Also at this time, the 155mm guns at Point-de-Hoek was moved inland unbeknownst to Allied intelligence, and decoys were used to counter this. By June 1944, many batteries, like 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐫𝐞 and 𝐟𝐨𝐫𝐞, had incomplete casemates, with guns in open pits, vulnerable to naval fire, and only a few of them had been completed or encased. However, 𝐟𝐨𝐫𝐞 was almost completed by 1944 June. Thus, the German defensive plan for Normandy was to integrate static coastal fortifications or small strongpoints with limited mobile reserves, aiming to repel the invasion at the water's edge while preparing for counterattacks. Batteries were designed to operate autonomously, with supplies and shelters to withstand prolonged assaults until the panzer reinforcements would arrive. Obviously, we know what the end result was, but, taken individually, there were successes. Batteries like 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐫𝐞 or 𝐟𝐵𝐿 disrupted Allied landings, with 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐫𝐞 shelling Omaha for 3 days, and 𝐟𝐵𝐿 sinking a destroyer. The fortifications also withstood heavy bombardment. Point-de-Hoek's casemates survived 1,000 tons of bombs, and they did delay Allied advances somewhat. However, the overall failures were that there was incomplete fortifications. The 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐫𝐞 had open gun emplacements, and the gun relocation at Point-de-Hoek would reduce the actual firepower landing on the beaches. Allied air and naval superiority overwhelmed the coastal guns, with 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐫𝐞 and Point-de-Hoek neutralized within 24 hours. The panzer delays and Fortitude's deception prevented effective counterattacks, allowing the Allies to secure the beachheads by June 7th to 12th. The German strategy for Normandy in 1944 centered on a forward defense, to repel the invasion at the beachheads, using coastal artillery batteries, beach obstacles, and strongpoints, with the limited mobile reserves for counterattack. The construction concepts relied on the 𝐟𝐫𝐫𝐞 standardized bunkers and casemates and trenches, built with reinforced concrete and camouflage to withstand bombing. Point-de-Hoek, 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐫𝐞, 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐫𝐞, 𝐟𝐵𝐿, exemplifies this approach, which is why I want you to see them in detail. With the robust fortifications, but incomplete works due to the resource constraint and Allied raids, the plan faded due to the Allied firepower, the intelligence gaps, and the delays in reserves showing up. Though the batteries caused significant disruption, they fought heroically. 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐫𝐞's post-war obscurity highlights ongoing debates about D-Day's priorities. But the German defensive plan, while it was formidable, could not overcome the Allies' overwhelming resources. "You cannot fight everyone everywhere at the same time," said someone very clever with a really cool hat. I want to start our journey through the German defenses of Normandy, here near the French village of Saint-Marcouf. First, a slight side note to you all. Remember the centralized forts of the pre-World War I era, the Brialmont forts. With a small area was fenced in with barbed wire, defended by machine guns on the perimeter, then with the main armament in a central massif many times, where the heavy guns were placed centrally. With a series of these is what you had for World War I, basically a string of forts surrounding the various cities, or fortified areas, strong points, mutually supporting and capable of holding off enemy forces or sieges for a prolonged time without outside support. That is, in effect, what you have along the coast of Europe in the Atlantic Wall. The wall part is actually somewhat misleading, as what you have is a string of forts, or strong points, defending the coast, capable of overlapping fire. And with that historic note in mind, it makes it easier to understand the entire concept of the German defensive strategy here. The Kriechbeck Battery was a German World War II artillery battery located near Saint-Marcouf on the Cotentin Peninsula in Normandy. It was one of the key components of Normandy's coastal fortifications, and if you look at it from above, it reminds us just a little bit of the centralized forts of World War I, doesn't it? Squint a little, you'll see it. As one of the most powerful batteries in Normandy, it could cover the coastlines from Saint-Vast-le-Hogue to Pointe du Hoc, with a firing range of 27 to 33 kilometers, 17 to 21 miles. It posed a significant threat to Allied ships approaching Utah Beach during D-Day, and was bombed prior, but to little effect initially, and it comes with a few really interesting stories. Construction began in mid-1941 by the Todt organization, utilizing mostly Russian and Polish prisoners of war. Later, some were augmented by French hired workers in 1943 to speed up construction, which was incomplete by the time D-Day rolled around, due to the frequent Allied bombardments starting already April 1944 and the lack of supplies. It had 4 210mm naval guns, that's 21 centimeters, Cannon 39, check, 6 75mm anti-aircraft guns, Canon 75 model 1897, reworked French guns. By June 1944, the 3 210mm Skoda K3940 guns, only 2 of them were housed in completed Regelbauten R683 casemates with up to 10 feet of concrete. 6 75mm anti-aircraft guns were now here, 3 20mm anti-aircraft guns, and 150mm tracer cannon, and 70 machine guns in Tobruk's and simple firing positions, which can be said to be rather significant. The battery spanned only 4 hectares, which included 22 underground blockhouses connected by over a mile of trenches and a few tunnels. It featured a command post, personnel and ammunition shelter, infirmary, kitchen, water pump, natural defenses including a narrow access trail, open fields to the west, and swamps to steep slopes to the east. The site also, of course, had barbed wire and minefields for protection. And, of course, there was an observation post. It's rather damaged today. It included a control bunker for the nearby 𝐟𝐨𝐫𝐞 battery, about 2 kilometers southwest of here. It lacked a clear sea view, so the 𝐟𝐨𝐫𝐞 battery, which we will visit next because these 2 places are linked by more than just history. On D-Day at 5 a.m., Commander Oberleutnant José Walter Olmesen, commanding a garrison of about 320 to 400 naval personnel, spotted the Allied invasion fleet through the battery's rangefinder and reported it to the Kriegsmarine headquarters in Cherbourg. This triggered the German alarm. At 5:52, the battery opened fire on Allied ships 17 kilometers away. Amongst the engaged the cruiser USS Tuscaloosa and the USS Quincy and the battleship USS Nevada. At 6:30, it sank the destroyer USS Curry and damaged other ships as well. An Allied aircraft attempting to deploy a smokescreen was shot down by the battery's anti-aircraft defenses. The battery had originally been heavily bombarded by 598 tons of bombs on the night of June 5th, destroying 1 210mm gun and some anti-aircraft defenses as well. But everything else was operational in the morning of the 6th. The battleship USS Nevada, Texas, the USS Arkansas fired on the battery, knocking out one casemate gun at 8 in the morning and silencing the second at 9 in the morning. On June 7th, the U.S. 1st Battalion, 22nd Infantry Regiment, 4th Infantry Division advanced on St. Marcouf, but was repelled by the repaired 75mm flak guns, and a counterattack supported by Astorville's 105mm guns, holding out 5 more days. And this is a very open, laid out, fortified position, artillery position, right here overlooking the beach, which you can just barely see the water out on the side. And I wanted to see this because this was a known entity that's still firing, which is awesome. Came here right at the right time when they're firing artillery. Life is good. But this was taken and known and never covered up and hidden. Like Macy. All bunkers and close defensive. Insulation and leads into a trench. And of course, this little brook on the roof. Let's see what they have in here. This is interesting. This looks like it did a shrapnel damage. Door's missing, but these things happen. Crew shelter before it was violently blown up and filled with other things. Munition transport cars, turn wheels. All these things were found here on the site as this was prepared for exhibition. So these are all original. And you see the wheels for some of the large artillery pieces, and I'm not sure what happened to this thing. But the munition cards are interesting. And a larger one as well. And this room was definitely fragged. See the walls all tore up from explosives. Laid bare into the rebar. Somebody threw something in here larger than a hand grenade. You see all the shrapnel in the roof. The roof is completely torn up from damage. As is the door, Jesus. Damn, this door really got tore up really well. It looks a little better. Organization tooled, tools, uniforms, and wood siding on the walls. But again, the roof was tore up. Close defensive position and double exit. Classic. Into the trench where you are safe. Still see some of the original paint. This will be up to the brook that we know so well. That is currently surrounded by barbed wire so people don't fall into it. But the steel ring is still in place, which is neat. This was not a fighting trench. This was a parapet for against air defense and bombardment, so shrapnel wouldn't hit you, and probably wouldn't have looked exactly like this. But you get the idea. You would need a position to go. You would need a trench to go between the positions of the artillery pieces and the bunkers. And it would be covered by camouflage netting, so it wouldn't be so apparent. And the next one here, I'm imagining this is an identical bunker to the first one. Double crew shelter. We'll see. This was the impact from a 105. On June 6th, a 105 shell went through the wall here, straight through missed the stairs completely, and did this. How on earth? How did you do that? How did you pass through that and hit the wall from that side? That is an extremely lucky hit. And I guess it shows that a 105 will penetrate the walls, although this certainly is not the wall anybody expected it to have hit. You fired a bunker, you kind of think maybe a flanking wall or a ceiling. You're not expecting to hit through the door. That's a hell of a thing. That is a hell of a thing. These are the munition trolleys they put on display here, along with photos of how this was restored. From 2004, they started turning this into a museum. This was also largely forgotten. This is just a hell of a thing. This was June 8th. And I'm curious on June 8th who fired 105s from this direction, from the back of the fort. Ventilation. Of course, it hit the other close defensive firing port, which was thinner. That somewhat explains it. Although it makes it even more lucky. On June 8th, after a 20-minute naval bombardment, U.S. forces finally entered the battery perimeter. The Germans retreated to their shelters. The last 2 10mm gun was destroyed. 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐜𝐫𝐬 ordered 𝐟𝐨𝐫𝐞 to fire 105mm shells on 𝐾𝐨𝐵𝐾's position, forcing an American withdrawal. And this goes a long way to explain why a shell had hit the entrance at the back of one of the bunkers. A counterattack with Lieutenant 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐜𝐫𝐬's 6th Company pushed the U.S. forces back to Duranville. Still holding out, but surrendered and bypassed. On the night of June 11-12th, 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐜 evacuated with 78 able-bodied men, leaving 21 wounded and a volunteer nurse behind. The battery was then captured without resistance by the U.S. 39th Regiment, the 9th Infantry Division, on June 12th. 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐜 was awarded the Iron Cross for his week-long resistance. And post-capture, the U.S. engineers, of course, tested the casemate's resilience with explosives, causing more damage than Allied bombing. And then, of course, there was the accident. We'll get to that in a minute. Straight through the door and hit the close defensive embrasure. Still, killed everybody in here. Certainly. This is the emergency exit. As we've seen on the east wall, but below the gravel, lays an emergency exit. Or certainly there should. Protected tunnel, reinforced on all sides. Haven't seen that before, certainly. I do wonder if the yellow was original. I think it would have to have been. It does lighten up, but then again, why isn't it just standard white? That would have done the same thing. There. Several more impacts of shells here. So they were definitely firing at this from the back They weren't on the continent, so it must have been naval fire. Nothing else would have been aimed here this time. Close defensive position. Nice and up for Tobruk. There. Ventilations. Close defensive. Dredging the wood on the walls, this would have been crew shelter. Or the beds would have been mounted. These were certainly a real thing too. Very good shape, I may add. Up to the close defensive point. Here that runs down the front of the bunker. Fairly small room. Must have been the platform for the guy to stand up. These are very large, I will say. This is painted. I don't know how you camouflage this to make it look like stone. To break up the outline, because it is certainly not stone. And considering, one would think the Allies do this. There's the yellow paint again. So that's original. So maybe the yellow paint in the connecting tunnel is a reproduction of the original. So I would have thought this was an ops post because of the large room, but it's not. This was a flak position. Here the munition stores for the flak position. I'm wondering if that is the original gun, or even type of gun. That is hard to tell. But speaking of flak, here's the U.S. Air Force coming over the horizon here in large transports. I don't know why we're flying large transport planes around. A lot of them. 6 C-41s. That's a lot of fuel. Could we send something more interesting? A couple of fighters, something? Not that C-41s, it's a comfortable ride. You know, if you can find something to sit on during it, of course. Well, at least the Air Force is here. Idea just exactly how well hidden these are, the artillery pieces here. Very flush to the ground. But from above, if they're not very well camouflaged, they do stand out. But this is remarkable to see when it's so evenly cleared of brush that you can see what everything is and where. Standing on a bunker. Yay. Alright. We'll continue to the trenches. That has a very unnatural crack in it. It's interesting that this too was covered up and nearly forgotten. makes you wonder how many more there are out here that has been forgotten. Interesting that there's a ventilation to my left in the ground in there. Tina, they named it. There used to be a fire position there. There also used to be an intact wall. Well, let's not go there. Built in 1943. This is a 10-man combat shelter. Cracked it. Maybe something landed on the roof. Well, something landed right here too, around Mr. Brook. If he was home, he would have had a bad day. This is a very large combat shelter. No, it's not. This is a very large fighting position. Huge artillery position with coast defense, air defense, underground tunnels. This, well, I thought this would be a munition store. I could be wrong. Usually, munition stores are built like this. And there's again the kitchen. All right, because this actually was the kitchen bunker. They had the kitchen in here. So, nicely set up. Reminding me I haven't had breakfast yet. This is a Type 134 shelter with storage, maintenance, kitchen, as we have here. Bits and pieces. As many underground connecting tunnels as you can make it without it being too over-constructed, because there's also a shortage of materials. So it's all about balance. And these were generally designed and built in stages. There would be a 42 program, 43 program, 44 program, 45 program, where everything on these positions were built in phases as material was available, balanced out with which was deemed the most important and necessary. The Red Cross gives me an idea, although there's two Tobruks here as well, and it took battle damage there too. I see what's in the hospital. Hospital will close defensive position, as it should be. These close defensive positions look very large from the inside. Ooh. Well, least thing you can do in the hospital. And there were the two huge steel doors here to my left and right. Speaking tube. And the interesting thing here is this stuff they have on display here are all things that they discovered while they were excavating this. I can't help but to think that, considering this was only found in 2004, how many more are hiding throughout? And this Normandy, this is a very known entity, given the battle here. How many more are hiding here and there? And two light shelters here. Could be crew shelters for crew of flat positions or close defense. But it's not. It's the shelter for the water pump. Because that is really important. If that's the only well there is. And come to think of it, I didn't see any wells in any of the other bunkers. The battery here itself was completely self-sufficient, and there was about 400 men in the garrison here, and most of them, and they lived like a little village here. So this one, same light shelter for, this is actually the meat shelter, or what's left of it. See the hooks in the ceiling for fresh meat. Possibly, I would imagine, some sort of cooler. But when it's all closed up, cement doesn't heat up that much or that fast. I love it when I get a little environment. And it doesn't really belong here, no. But I mean, it's here.
Over there?
L'avion vient des États-Unis, là. Ils sont venus. Les États-Unis, USA.
Doesn't look like the longest range in the world.
He didn't won the fight because he was.
Where the hell did they find a Spanish gun? Did the Condor Legion bring it back? I mean, it looks very much like the American. Short barreled.
Yeah, short barrel and everything.
Is that a Tobruk? Oh, this is just more munition store.
Yes.
And like I said, these complexes were built in stages. And here's another firing position that was under construction in 1944 and obviously never got to be finished or get a roof. It is a convertible like the others.
4 years.
Yeah.
Exactly 2.5 years.
Have you been to the blockhouse?
No.
Or Le Coupole? Go to the blockhouse on the way home.
Yeah.
It's fucking amazing because you're looking at something that is so big. The resources went to waste for something that really didn't do anything. So the Russian 122, yeah.
The Russian used the lot, the 122.
They started wheeling out some of their old stuff, very old stuff. I like that they have German reenactors here.
Yeah.
Because I know in France normally you can't have German reenactors. They can't wear German uniforms. They can't this and that. And I keep saying, well, I'm sorry, but the Germans being here is sort of the reason why all of you are here. They're a big part of the history. If the Germans hadn't been here, they probably wouldn't be here at all. Yeah. Give them a break. I mean, they didn't have to. All the stuff they found in here. Which is rather terrifying. Detonators, perhaps, original paint, shrapnel on the walls, shrapnel on the ceiling. These things were hit, as you can tell, the corner missing right there. Not natural decay either. So this is actually one of the guns that could quite possibly have been here. A French naval gun that was put in place by the Germans. These things took some hits. I wonder if there was some strafing here too. .130 French gun. It's an 88.
I think that.
It does look a bit like one, but it's definitely in the wrong mount with only half the wheels there. This should have another buggy with 2 wheels, or it should have been put all the way down on its place, but it's here, so we appreciate it. This is half of the vehicle towing. 18 here looks like it's sort of tilted over, cracked on the roof. Yeah, something happened to it. This looks like the speaking tube. Either speaking tubes to the command center, very probably. It's neat to see them. It is an 88 indeed. But please, put it in place.
Après qu'ils ont pris la cible, ils voulaient faire un essai pour voir.
The roof have caved in. That was hitting something hard and heavy. Wow. The roof have completely caved in. The entire bunker is gone here. Never seen that before. I wonder if that must be naval gunfire. But this is the 𝐾𝐨𝐧'𝐭 they were intending to build over all of the guns. These were the casemates they were intending on building over all of these positions. But this one really had a rather tragic story, because 11 and 12 June the Germans were running out of men, so they decided to abandon the position. There was no one fighting here when the Americans arrived, and they accidentally blew up the munition store behind the bunker, killing almost a dozen American soldiers. After the fighting, it was a complete accident. Very sad how that happened. And here you can see, in place, the small dollies that would bring the shells up to the gun. Or temporary stores before firing. Holy hell, that bad. But in war, things happen and things go wrong, and people die for reasons other than enemy action, which is always very sad, but it's a real thing you contend with. The RAF had bomber crews life expectancy at 7%. Every time they went out, they expected 7% not to return. That was an acceptable number. Unfortunately, there were times when 30, 40% did not come back. And until the Mustang finally arrived in numbers over Europe, the RAF and the US Air Force actually had to suspend operations for a while due to the losses they were taking. And I knew the Type 134 was also used for munition store, as I've seen that previously. This will lead us into a very destroyed bunker. This is very close to the casemate, which is in there. This is the munition store the Americans blew up by accident. Interesting that the powder store was so close to the bunker that you blew up all the shells. You took down the bunker with it. I will say that is very close, but of course there was a lot of shells and it was not a good time. 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐜𝐫𝐞. I like it. Big favor of this. To my left. Shrapnel to my front, as well as a firing position. Lots of shrapnel. Lots of damage. This is a 501 shelter. That over the door was actually blown up. Lots of damage. This is a regular small crew bunker. That's all this was. Wooden walls, close firing position. All of these beds were written over this, and they would have made them. And the emergency exit. Of course. The rifle rack at the door. Various equipment. And a door that's violently being moved. The battery was a critical strong point, often described as a village, due to its extensive infrastructure. It was the first to fire on Allied forces at 5:52 a.m. on D-Day, highlighting its role as a primary target. This site had eventually endured over 800 tons of bombs from April 19th to June 6th, yet remained operational, showcasing the resilience of the fortification. And in the next episode, we are going backwards to the 𝐼𝐸𝐵𝐿 battery behind here. That was claimed to be one of the most modern of the Normandy strong points. And here I can really show you the evolving concepts behind German design and defense, seeing something I have never seen before. Alright, it is time for our second evaluation of the Normandy defenses and strongpoints. This time the 𝐼𝐸𝐵𝐿 battery, claimed to be one of the most modern of the German defenses, and it does look quite a bit different than many of the others in more open concepts. It's located near the village of 𝐼𝐸𝐵𝐿 on the Canton Peninsula in Normandy, a few miles behind the Crispeck battery. It too played a significant role during the D-Day invasion. It was strategically placed to cover the coastline, though its inland position limited direct sea visibility, thus relying on the nearby Crispeck battery for observation. It was equipped with 4 105mm Schneider guns, original French, captured in 1940. It had a range of approximately 12 kilometers, capable of targeting Utah Beach. It was part of the German Kriegsmarine's coastal defensive network, with 270 to 295 personnel stationed here, primarily naval gunners, under Oberleutnant zur See Klaus Tratzka and later Lieutenant Dr. Hans Schuster. The battery was a critical strong point, designed to withstand heavy bombardment and to delay the Allies' advance, of course. Its resistance during D-Day and subsequent days of fighting highlighted its robust construction. Construction began in 1941, where the site was selected for its proximity to the coast and ability to cover Utah Beach, on a clearing, the 10-hectare site, and laying foundations for casemates, bunkers, and trenches. The battery was built around an existing farm, integrating it into the defensive layout, and the camouflage here was expert. By late 1941, it had the typical basic infrastructure with the open firing pits for the 105s, and until main construction phase in 1942, this is how it sat. The Todt organization then constructed 4 large Regelbauten H671 casemates, as you see today, housing one of the Snyder guns, with concrete walls up to 2 meters thick, as was standard. Thereafter, additional structures was constructed, including ammunition bunkers, personnel shelters, and a command post, and anti-aircraft defenses, of course. Over 1 kilometer of underground tunnels and trenches connected the casemates and bunkers, facilitating secure movement, which is the first covered trenches I have seen, yet different than that from the 𝐾𝐨𝐽 battery had. And also, some issues with the construction must have occurred, namely that the main ammunition magazine constructed underground was too small for the 105mm ammunition. That raises some questions, but anybody I could ask them to are now dead. There's of course lots of barbed wire, minefields, lots of Tobruk's to cover the rear, including my first of seeing a kind of small defensive bunkers at the end of the tunnels. Fascinating. Also, a radar station had been planned but not completed by D-Day. The camouflage efforts included painting the casemates to blend in with the landscape and using netting to conceal the gun positions. You can still see the remains of the camouflage paint today. By 1943, the battery was partially operational, with all 4 105mm guns installed, though some defensive works remained incomplete due to air raids. Anti-aircraft defenses was strengthened in 1944 with 20mm flak guns and machine guns. A telephone network linked 𝐟𝐨𝐫𝐞 to 𝐾𝐶HBEC and 𝐶HBOK for coordination. Bombing in April to June 1944 disrupted the final construction, leaving some planned structures, smaller additional shelters, unfinished. By June 1944, the battery was fully operational. It was heavily bombarded by Allied aircraft and naval forces, including the USS Nevada and Arkansas. 1 casemate was damaged, but the guns remained operational. Vehicle's defensive position up here. And what's really cool is how they built these tunnels. Now, as we all know, I love tunnels. And the problem is, these are sort of above ground tunnels. That's rather terrifying. And because if this was a matter of close defense, we are very close to the surface. Of course, if this is built as a fighting tunnel, as a trench firing, then it makes much more sense. But this should lead all the way through the battery. At least they have come further with their trench systems from the First World War to now they are fully covered. Right on the ground. I'm not on the ground at all, which is rather troubling, honestly. Built by Organization 2 from 41 to, of course, 44. And I am suddenly thinking he was a bathroom. I may have been wrong, but I don't think I am. Because it's a little like one. Cement ceiling still on the surface, so direct hit would not be healthy for me. this was the munition store. And here were actual munitions stored for, well, light arms, small arms. The interesting thing about this particular place was that they had weaponry, some of it dating all the way back to World War I. Because, well, they knew stuff from Russia, went to the active fighting front, and this Atlantic Wall minis, they literally got whatever that could be scrounged up of captured weapons, older weapons from store, and a lot of different types of weapons, which led to a whole lot of problems when it comes to various types of munitions. And we all know how different types of munitions is a horrible nightmare when it comes to logistics. And Germany did have a slight logistical problem from time to time. Not to mention a horrible airplane building program. 177, I'm looking at you. But now I'm thinking this time is a new build, which the other one was blown up in the battle. This was heavily contested. The Americans made it here already on the 8th of June. Am I going the wrong way? So, close defensive position, shrapnel on the walls, and that should lead us into the actual bunker itself, where the guns were placed. This looked like a smaller caliber weapon that was placed in these. Nice how they put this together. And this battery's 5 minutes drive from the last one by the sea. I feel I took the wrong turn. I feel I took a wrong turn. I don't know if it was an original tunnel. That was destroyed, I believe it was. It's interesting that the tour organization had almost 1.5 million people working there, which is sort of an army on its own, really. A lot of them did their compulsory labor service with the tour organization. And there's 170 members working here, operating the 4 guns. And this was one of the few really completed batteries. Most of the men stayed in the village, here behind in their houses there, but at least 70 was always here at the battery on duty. If this was the prototype of what they were planning on doing by interconnecting all the batteries, I'm impressed. I like that. This was not bad at all. The problem is, with saturation bombing, even 500-pound bombs, probably 250-pound bombs would break through this ceiling and break the connections and the munition stores, which would lead to other problems if you no longer have connection to the munition store and the forts, the bunkers, the fighting positions. Then, and you don't have any trenches because you were expecting underground connections only, then you really have a problem. And this is probably the munition store. It is a munition store. Well, that's what it was designed for. It has a very nice exhibition of life and times here. Problem was the 105mm ammunition that was required for the guns was too big to store there, so they used it for basic storage. Again, why did they build a munition store that is too small for the munition, for the weaponry that made the battery exist? These are basically covered trenches. Large ammunition store. Very interesting how they did this. These are facing railroads, most of these, not facing the direction of the guns, which would make more sense for me if we were having united fighting direction, not just close defense. These are also kind of tight and bars in front of in order to fire from. I'm guessing. There's the Tobruk. This was a combat shelter for 10 men. Close defensive. Tobruk and the covered trench. I think we can call this a covered trench as much as we can call it a tunnel. Defensive. I don't see any damage. Not even on the ceiling. Heavy steel doors are missing. There's a bird that changed his mind. Sorry, buddy. Didn't mean to scare you, man. Combat shelter. Pretty straightforward. Wood in the walls for the beds. Close defensive positions. Hooks for the beds. And it's a very nice touch. They put some pictures up in here so people can see what they were looking like. And there's a periscope in here. So there was more to this than just a bed shelter, which was interesting. And all the ventilation, and there would be a bunker oven, I imagine, and that should be the exhaust port there. Now, we had a little step there where we were actually outside. And I don't know if that's because I don't see it having been constructed. These were literally just slabs they put over the covered trench. Oh, they had a well. Outstanding. They had learned something. And now the overhead has been changed to corrugated metal. A little air here. I'm coming down to what I'm assuming is kind of the combat shelter. Or munition store, although we're walking quite a bit away from the guns here. So I don't know. No combat shelter. Emergency exit and nice exhibitions. It's nice when they do exhibitions here. So there's crew shelters for about, well, I found crew shelters for 20 of the men. So this is an interesting defensive position. Corrugated iron on the side, observation, good degrees, cement slab overhead, and a solid steel beam there. I haven't seen anything like this before. This looks almost like a Prussian era World War I observation post. Little observation bunker we see. Not exactly as sturdy as a build, and with no back protection. Odd. Very strange. They say this is the most complete, or one of the most complete positions of Normandy, which is very interesting because it has some features that I haven't usually seen anywhere else that I would almost describe to as being modern but cheap. Don't know if that's the right way of putting it, but like corrugated metal, 20-30 centimeters of cement overhead on basically a covered trench. That's pretty cheap. No steel domes, couple of brooks, but still pretty cheap. And here you can really see just how shallow this is. And down there is the next battery over. And this was the first evolution of gun platform. As I said, these fortifications, these batteries, were built in stages and upgraded each year. This was the first evolution for the gun platform. And eventually, they became covered like the one next to it. So these were 105s. It is a fairly small casemate compared to the ones I've seen in Denmark and other places here in France. There's 4 of these. From the front, it looks intact. Looks like the Tobruk took a direct hit. The inside of a Tobruk, now you know. And here's the other side of the bunker and the Tobruk, and something very interesting. Here's another little ringstand, if you'll distract yourself from the fact that it's covered by a net. But why are there little ringstands here? There's very little they can shoot at except the rare. At 5 in the morning, Fishbeck's rangefinder alerted 𝐟𝐸𝐫 to the Allied fleet. 𝐟𝐨𝐫𝐞's guns fired on Utah Beach, targeting landing crafts and supporting 𝐾𝐨𝐵𝐞's engagement with Allied ships. The battery faced intense naval counterfire, with one gun finally disabled and a direct hit from the USS Nevada. On June 7th, the 4th Infantry Division, 1st Battalion, 22nd Infantry Regiment attacked, but was repelled by 𝐟𝐨𝐫𝐞's remaining guns and supporting fire from 𝐾𝐨𝐵𝐞. On June 8th, 𝐟𝐨𝐫𝐞 fired the 105mm shells at 𝐾𝐨𝐵𝐞's position after American units had overrun the perimeter, on, of course, Oberleutnant Olmeson's request, in order to dislodge the U.S. forces, which it did, and they were driven from the battery, despite repeated assault by the 22nd Infantry on the 𝐟𝐨𝐫𝐞 battery on 7th and 8th June. The one operational 105mm guns were still capable of slowing the American advance. On 9 June, after an intense artillery bombardment, the 22nd Infantry launched another assault, on this occasion supported by flamethrowers. And due to the heroic actions of Private Riley and his flamethrower, which set alight some of the German ammunition, Captain Tybert had no choice but to surrender the garrison of 169 survivors. The 𝐟𝐨𝐫𝐞 battery's coordination with 𝐾𝐨𝐵𝐞 via telephone and shared observation made it a formidable part of the Atlantic Wall, with his 105mm guns, which was less powerful than many others, but could provide rapid fire for coastal defense. The battery's resistance from 6 to 9 June delayed the U.S. advance, but its inland position and reliance on 𝐾𝐨𝐵𝐞's rangefinder limited its effectiveness once isolated. Again, here the trench comes out from the covered trench to behind the bunker here with the broken to brook, and something else hit it right there. Let's see what happened to it. Close defensive position, of course. Still with the wood in place. Very nice. This we know, that's into the fighting department. And the other side of the coast defensive. And here, a little crew bunker where the crew could wait, or you would have a command room, but I do not believe so. There's another one, identical to it. Let's see, I'm curious if here is, well, it looks like there'll be bedding hooks. And I'm looking for a little stove or a little oven. I don't see one. Even if this was, well, there's a hole in the wall there. I could have been a bunker oven, and it should have been, because it's open and it's cold in the winter. There's the actual fighting position. The mounting rings are still on the floor. Good. And munition drop. 1.5 guns. Okay. Certainly that took a hit. I wonder where that came from, if that was a frontal hit. I suppose it could have been. Just see. Oh, something came through there too. The close defensive position is destroyed. This is this. Oh, God, I wonder if that's the one that did it. That's a bit of a thing. Oh. defensive position. Yep. There's some very interesting rear hits to these bunkers, and I keep wondering if this is deliberate, because it denotes some damn good shooting. You could actually place these through the door. That's amazing if they did. Very much enjoyed the bunker camouflage to make these gigantic bunkers look like farmhouses or what have you. It's just amazing to think that everybody in the village would have known. You'd have seen the construction. But maybe it worked. That took quite a few hits and quite a bit of shrapnel. Like they put palm trees on it. But it's a nice little paint job. I just don't think you're fooling anybody. Even from the front they camouflaged it. So what did they camouflage the giant protrusion from? You have all this stone, nice camouflage paint, camouflage netting, and then you have a 105 protrusion that would be camouflaged as what exactly? Although I totally dig it, I'm in big favor of this, but it does appear that someone wasn't fooled. They also didn't penetrate. It is just really unfair when you're being exposed to flanking fire and you only have ability to fire forwards. I guess the camouflage really didn't work. The wood is still somewhat intact, still in place. Close defensive positions here. Wood still in place, it has not exploded, which is, I suppose, very fortunate. See, close defensive position. Now there would be somewhere an underground for the munition, at least as storage. All the munitions, these spent shell casings, go into a little hole. There used to be a little crawl space, at least in the bigger ones, where you would crawl down here to retrieve them. This is a ventilation grate. This is a very large ventilation grate. I've never seen these before over the cannon positions, especially the cannon positions that are as open as this one. And it's still here, which is rather remarkable, to be honest. And also the hook to change barrel and move cannon, as we have seen in forts for the past hundreds of years. But this blows me away. Have such a vast opening here. Would you really need ventilation? Alright, I'm going to go, of course they did, because otherwise they wouldn't have built it, because Germans never over-engineer anything. They are pragmatic people. Ooh. Shell went through the ventilation into the roof from, well, could have come through there, taken that chunk out with it, or exploded there. Exploded there, went sideways through there, came out through there, and impacted there. Looks intact as well. Firing position in place. Crew compartment in place. Bunker element ventilation in place. Good for the beds. Except the bed door is missing. Should also imagine that being a munitions store. Because the munition will have to come from somewhere. And there better be a tunnel there. Tunnel. And a very good degree of observation from here. As the tunnel system, as you enter the tunnel system here, just have not seen these so crude and rudimentary before. But here it is. And that, I will give it to them here at the museum. They did a very good job setting this up, having nice displays and a lot of information about the construction of these bunkers, about the commander here and the battle here. So, you know, well done. But I would like a hot dog stand. Now it does offer a very rare glimpse into an Atlantic wall construction, and its casemates and tunnels are mostly best preserved in Normandy. Now, next we will take a look at something far more rudimentary, something you have seen photos of and heard of perhaps, but may not know the story of. So let's fix that. You have all seen the images of the guns at the 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐫𝐸 battery. So it is time to tell you the story of the battery. It was a significant German artillery battery and a key component of the Atlantic Wall, of course located near the village of 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐫𝐸, positioned right between the Allied landing beaches of Gold and Omaha. It thus played a notable role during D-Day invasion, although not a very long one. The site is spread out somewhat more than the previous two we visited, more open and more rudimentary. Equipped with four 150mm TBTSK C-36 naval guns. The battery had a range of 20 to 22 kilometers, capable of targeting ships and landing forces on both Gold and Omaha beaches. It was part of the German Kriegsmarine's coastal defensive network, manned by approximately 120 to 184 naval personnel. The battery's strategic position made it a priority target for the Allies, as it could threaten the invasion fleet and beachheads. Its rapid neutralization on D-Day underscores the importance and the effectiveness of Allied tactics here, but also noting the different construction and seemingly lack of close defenses as opposed to other two batteries we've seen. Construction began in April 1942. The site was chosen for its elevated cliff position, obviously offering unobstructed views of the channel. Initial work involved clearing the 10-hectare site, leveling the ground, and laying the foundations, first for open gun pits, then later for the casemates you see today, and of course support structures. Here was, or is, 4 Regelbauten M272 casemates, built to house the 15-centimeter guns, each with 2-meter-thick reinforced concrete walls and ceilings to withstand aerial and naval bombardment. Construction prioritized rapid completion due to the strategic importance of the Normandy coast. And you can see the construction was rapid and not as solid as we have become used to seeing in German positions. Also, a fire control bunker was constructed on the cliff's edge, very iconic, equipped with a rangefinder and optical targeting equipment to direct fire, accurately up to about 22 kilometers. The bunker had a 3-meter thick concrete walls and multiple observation levels, and is still intact today despite being hit multiple times. Support structures included ammunition bunkers with separate chambers for shells and charges, but again these were very small and thin-roofed. Personnel shelters, a command post, anti-aircraft defenses. Approximately 500 meters of trenches and tunnels connected the key structures for somewhat secure movement. By late 1943, the battery was fully operational, all 4 guns installed in casemates, and the fire control bunker completed as well. Additional fortifications, such as concrete reinforced trenches and secondary defenses, were finalized, although we don't see much of them today. Camouflage efforts include painting the casemates to blend in with the cliffside, and using netting to conceal gun positions from aerial reconnaissance. There's the same type of cannon casemate we see all along the Atlantic Wall, with a cannon position of generally different calibers, whatever was available, preferably something over 10, facing the ocean. And it all started whenever the Germans came to the location. They had already predestined the location where they were going to put up the artillery positions, so they wheeled cannons into positions and eventually built casemates over them. Allied air raids intensified in the spring of 1944, particularly from April and onwards, causing minor damage but not halting any operations. By June 1944, the battery was at peak readiness, though some planned defenses, like additional anti-aircraft guns, remained incomplete. Alright, the Allies dropped an ungodly amount of ordnance on these positions, and especially this one here on Sumer. And what is interesting is, many of these hits were quite a good distance, but here you see the trenches. Here you see the trenches interspersed with the gun positions. Here's the observation bunker. This was filmed right after D-Day, so no one was shooting at them. They had plenty of time to film it. But if you then go on the ground, which they did later, and see the bunkers, you see the heavy bombs they used here. You see how churned up the ground is around the gun positions. Some of them have even eroded all the way down to the foundation. It's amazing that these guns were still capable of firing, and hardly a surprise that one of the gunners were rather stunned at the onslaught. But just testament to how Germans built things and how solid these are, why many of these are still in place today, and even some of them hanging partially over cliffs at the water have eroded some of the positions, and still hanging, dangling there intact. Here you just see how the dirt and the ground have been blasted up in front of this casemate. You actually see the bottom of it, and yet the gun looks almost intact, and as far as I remember, it actually was. It's just amazing the amount of punishment this could take. However, the squishy things inside and the pressure wave, well, they may not have fared as well as the steel and stone and rebar. But remembering how few casualties they actually had here, most of them actually did survive even this bombardment. These are relatively small casemates compared to what we see in other places of the Atlantic Wall. Like the ones we see in Denmark are far larger than these. Compared to what I see other places, these actually are surprisingly small. Just with a few rooms for communication and munitions that have been destroyed, presumably in the fighting. And then you have the cannon pit, which is not really that well protected from frontal fire, have a small shield on it. You've all seen this most iconic image from Normandy, from the bunkers. It's been portrayed and shown pretty much everywhere. But what do you know of the actual story of these? These casemates were actually quite small compared to many of those I've seen on the Atlantic Wall. But I wanted to show you this battery and tell you the story of what happened here and how it ended, specifically because most of us have seen the image without actually knowing much about what happened here. One could say that the First World War was the final death nail of what you call the centralized fort, because by placing everything in one small triangle, a square of a bunker, even with cement and even a little rebar, one hit is all it would take in the powder magazine to destroy a centralized fort. The castles, of course, from decades and millennials before that, were in what you could, in some justification, say also a centralized fort. But all that went away with gunpowder and shells and howitzers, cannons, and they had to decentralize. Like they did here. This is, in essence, a fort. It is just decentralized, firing positions, different places, separately placed apart. This is basically the last evolution of a fortress, or of a fort. This is where the medieval fort went. And down there is 𝐬𝐫𝐽, and what you see the remnants of way out in the distance is the mulberry ports that was scattered in the storm not long after D-Day. And they're still sitting there. And here on top of the battery you have a nice little cliff climb and the calmest weather I've seen in Normandy. Yay! Some of you know that I have a little day job, side job in the film industry where I've made a few World War II films. One of them called The Iron Cross, where we actually shot a D-Day scenario that was set pretty much here, except we filmed it somewhere else in a far more intact bunker that was set up in Denmark, where they kept it all intact and very nice. So you'll see, well, you see the movie. Oh well, shameless promotion here. Sorry. And here's the observation post. I'm imagining this is the auxiliary observation post. There used to be a few. Built very rudimentary. Close protection, as we are used to seeing. With a unnatural hole here. This I haven't seen before. Wondering if there was a grenade slide or something here. I don't think there was. You would want to throw it right here in front of the firing post. The door is missing. Hello? And this will be the main observation deck. And above us is the one outdoors outside. This must be the auxiliary observation. I wonder if it's been shot at or it's just wasn't built especially. Took some damage maybe. Communication cable from here to the inside room. Too bad there's no signs or anything left. That really would have been nice. There was. So in the movie The Iron Cross, The Road to Normandy, our German protagonists were literally in a small defensive position, cannon position, like this one, right here in Normandy. Unfortunately, the actual Omaha beach locations, there's practically no bunkers left. There's a few positions like this one nearby on either side, but there's not a whole lot left where the actual landings took place, which is a shame. So we had to shoot the movie up in Denmark, where they had a restored museum with everything in place, and the cannons in place, but it's the same type. This is where our German was for the movie, or this is where it was envisioned in this position, or one like it that has now been destroyed. And it will be from an observation deck like this. They were the first to see the invasion fleet. They would be standing in a room like this, like the one up here on the observation deck, looking out with binoculars over the ocean. And that's where they spotted the invasion fleet. That was pretty much as close to an actual location as we could. This is interesting because this actually is original. This hole over the firing position. This is a close defensive position. I don't know why there's this underneath. I am a little curious. I guess I'll look for an answer. So when the bunkers were overrun, they would have blown this door and then come through. We had to take a little bit of artistic licensing because they would have come through here, blown this door, and there would have been another door, and we would have heard the close defensive position rattle, and we didn't, but it is a movie. And if we actually had to have them fight through it, the actual time to time, it would have been a little longer. Although honest, the first cut of the movie was 2.5 hours long. I could probably have trimmed another 10, but what are you gonna do? On the night of June 5th, the battery was heavily bombed by Allied aircraft, with over 1,500 tons of bombs dropped across Normandy, however causing minor damage to 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐜, leaving its guns operational still. At 5:30 a.m. on June 6th, the battery opened fire on the Allied invasion fleet, targeting ships off Gold and Omaha beaches. It engaged the French cruiser FFL Georges Legues and the battleship USS Arkansas, with mixed success due to intense Allied counterfire. From 5:50, Allied naval forces, including the HMS Ajax and HMS Argonaut, bombarded the battery with 6-inch and 4.7-inch guns. By 6:20, 2 coastal guns were silenced, 1 barrel destroyed and 1 damaged, and the fire control bunker was also hit, disrupting targeting for a moment. The battery then resumed sporadic fire later in the morning, targeting landing crafts and troops on Gold Beach, but its effectiveness was reduced. By June 7th, renewed naval bombardment by the Ajax firing 114 shells and the Argonaut silencing the remaining 2 guns by 8:45 the next day. The battery's ammunition stores were hit, causing explosions and forcing the garrison to retreat to their shelters. Then, British forces from the 2nd Battalion, Devonshire Regiment, 5th Infantry Division, advanced from Gold Beach and captured the battery by midday on June 7th, without significant resistance. Oberleutnant surrendered approximately 120 surviving personnel. The rapid neutralization of the battery, basically within 24 hours, prevented it from significantly disrupting the Allied landings, though it caused some damage to ships and delayed operations at Gold Beach. The site was inspected by Allied engineers, who noted the casemate's durability despite direct hits. The battery was abandoned after D-Day with minimal post-war damage, except, of course, from the traditional, apparently, ammunition handling accident demolishing 1 casemate. Ammunition bunker, which is placed forwards of the firing position, which is a little strange. This is very empty. It's very wet. And there's a hole in the floor. Some of it's interesting. This is probably one of those things that you want to people against, but hey. How's that feel? This is a little room for the fuses. Probably wooden doors. Nothing really interesting. Nothing big. This was not for the cannons. This was small arms ammunition that we stored here. Clearly. De virker som hollænder. So here, behind the bunker, is the munition storage for these, which is really not very big. I'm actually surprised. These are not large munition shelters at all. Exactly the same design as the one in the field. That's strange. I mean, there's only about 10 or 15 centimeter cannons, but still, they should have had more ammunition supply, I would have thought. The battery's exposed position made it vulnerable to concentrated naval fire, and its lack of heavy anti-aircraft defenses left it open and vulnerable to air raids. To me, it seems almost as an afterthought. It needed to be constructed fast and cheap, and it's here due to its location. A very exposed location which probably had required a significantly stronger reinforcement than what was actually placed here. You know, from this bunker you can just hint the running trench that once ran to the bunker over here. So something hit this thing. This far. This casemate was not blown up during the bombardment or the fighting. It was, well, self-detonated in handling of munitions after the fighting had ended, something we have seen quite a few times before, sadly. Let's take a look at something completely different, however. Now, that was a straightforward artillery position we just saw. But now let's take a look at a different kind of Normandy resistance point, one without guns, namely the Hillman Fortress, designated by the Germans as Widerstandsnest 17 and codenamed Hillman by the Allies. It was a critical German bunker complex and a command post. It overlooked Sword Beach and served as the regimental headquarters for the 736th Grenadier Regiment, and from here it controlled the coastal defenses in the area. The strategic location, with a robust, low-to-the-ground, heavily reinforced complex, the fortification made it a significant obstacle during the D-Day invasion. Now, Hillman was the headquarters for the 736th Grenadier Regiment, commanded by Colonel Ludwig Krug. It controlled the artillery fire from the nearby Morris Battery, Widerstandsnest 16, about 800 meters north of here, which housed 4 105mm Czech howitzers. Construction began in early 1942 under the Todt organization, using initial forced labor to maintain secrecy. Initial work focused on laying foundations for bunkers and trenches. In 1942-43, major bunker construction began, including construction of the 𝐟𝐨𝐫𝐞 was completed. The trenches, minefields, barbed wire was added to fortify the perimeter. By June 1944, the complex was fully operational, but still subject to minor refinements. Here were 2 command posts, bunkers armed with observation cupolas. One housed Colonel Krug's headquarters, signal center, mess room, sleeping quarters, designed for resilience against bombardment. Here was also an H-605 bunker, a very rare bunker for anti-tank guns or vehicles, one of only 5 known examples here in Normandy. Unfortunately, since it is time for D-Day, everyone is busy celebrating, having a grand old time, and every single room is crammed with tourists and soldiers looking at what was here. I can give you a slightly less detailed view than normal, but you get the picture. The entire complex included 18 underground concrete bunkers, including personnel shelters, munition store, and communication posts, linked by trenches and tunnels. A network of concrete-lined trenches, tunnels connected the bunkers, allowing secure movement. The system was surrounded by Tobruk pits, and in particular, there was what looks like a dummy steel dome. Here was extensive barbed wire and minefields encircling the site, and with high grass providing natural cover for the northern approach. The bunkers were painted and covered with netting to blend in with the landscape, minimizing visibility for Allied air reconnaissance. But unlike artillery-focused batteries like Macy or Pointe du Hoc, 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐫 was a command and control hub, prioritizing communication over direct firepower. The H-608 bunkers were specialized for regimental conditions. The 24-hectare site was comparable to Macy, with 44, but larger than Pointe du Hoc, with 2, reflecting its role. The 716th Division consisted of older conscripts and Eastern volunteers, with limited training and somewhat unreliable equipment, reflecting Germany's manpower shortage. Despite this, 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐫's defenders were disciplined, and they contributed to the prolonged resistance. The battle for the 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐫 fortress was a significant engagement during the D-Day invasion, led by the 1st Battalion Suffolk Regiment, with support from tanks, artillery, and engineers. Its prolonged resistance and strategic implications for the Allied campaign. By 1300 hours on June 6th, the Suffolks have captured the Mora's battery, after naval and artillery fire forced its surrender. They then advanced to 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐫, which no longer had an actual function to play on the battlefield, short of holding up and holding out as long as they could. Expecting it to have been softened up by prior bombardment, the British found it undamaged, due to failed naval and air strikes. Over several assaults, they suffered losses, 5 killed in action, 24 wounded, and 2 tanks knocked out. After further heavy shelling, the site was finally overrun by 8:15 in the evening on June 6th, but the command bunker was impenetrable. However, Colonel Krug had no more ways of fighting back. He called General Wilhelm Richter and said, "Herr General, the enemy are on top of my bunker. They're demanding my surrender. I have no means of resisting and no contact with my own men. What am I to do?" After a long pause down the line, General Richter, who had received bad news all day, said, "Colonel, I can no longer give you any orders. You must act on your own judgment. Auf Wiedersehen." And with that, Colonel Krug surrendered on the 7th in the morning. The Germans had minimal losses, and approximately 150 men surrendered. Surviving the high level of bombing and attacks can be seen as a testament to the fortress design and construction. Sadly, today many of the bunkers are gone and not accessible, but those remaining are very well restored and filled with the correct equipment and tourists. But anyway, still.
On voit jusqu'à le 𝐸𝐻, jusqu'au cap d'Antifer, on voit très très loin. Des fois, c'est même, quand on voit le cap d'Antifer, c'est mauvais. Mais derrière, chez nous, là, il y avait des camions, c'était stratégique. À tel point que même.
Là, c'est là où vous allez manger, vous allez dormir, je pense. Ouais. Mais c'est profond. Mais chez les Français aussi.
Il dormait là, toujours?
The most important thing in my world, 7 gates has to be still gone. And you get to the cloche. Which here, 4-point observation cloche, must be a firing dome as well. It's very big for that. There must be what you need here. And as you know, I have seen my share of steel domes from the Second World War and the First, but never one that looks like it was simply planted in average height on a grassy knoll here. That's very interesting. It's a fantastic view of the ocean from here. Well, the trenches here look pretty much like they would in World War I, except this is a very narrow running trench from the center of the fort out to a nice Tobruk. I think that's a French turret. Alright, this is neat. So you got the traditional trench, the Tobruk, and you have a close defensive position. Yes. I have never seen this kind of targeting information written in a simply Tobruk before. It makes perfect sense. And also, here is the remains of a speaking tube. In many of the Tobruks I've seen on the Atlantic Wall, I've never seen a speaking tube, although again, it makes sense. And how low this is to the ground is also an indication of how hard it would be to actually hit in a ground altercation, or shall we call it a battle. Check out the well, because in other positions in Holland I've seen well buildings, and here fortunately it's intact. So I'm just curious to see what it actually looks like here. Not exactly a fighting position. Well, guess what? It looks dark. Shocking. Well, this is what it looks like. This is pretty much it. Brick. Light in there. A small well room. Just thought it was interesting that the well room is located in the middle. I'm assuming that there's access to the well from inside the complex itself. Which is a proof that there were still above ground trenches in use during World War II and on the Atlantic Wall. Not everything was encased in cement. Of course, the large command post bunkers, cannon placement were, but there was still in the field trenches that really felt the air power on that day with napalm and bombs. Is one of the guard posts for the perimeter, which is dug into stone, reinforced, which actually looks really interesting. Not very big, just another little pillbox under the field with an emergency exit here. But this is built in stone with a reinforced roof, of course. Not very deep. I did not go down that far. The prolonged resistance here at 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐫𝐞, combined with the congestion thus at Sword Beach and the German defences in the bocage, bottled up the Allied forces in Normandy for weeks. Historians have criticized the 3rd Division for not just bypassing 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐫𝐞 to focus on Caen, though the fortress command role made it a priority target. And they did what they did, so stop second-guessing them, you were not there. I just want to give all of the reenactors, those who are keeping history alive around the world, and especially today, those who have showed up in Normandy to display their uniforms, their cars, their weapons, take care of the tanks sitting here like the Churchill. Those we run into later, both the Germans, the Americans, the Free French, the Polish I have seen here as well, and the many, many others who are doing their very best, probably driving their respective wives and girlfriends crazy, but they're keeping history alive. And that is what military historical reenactment needs to do, needs to continue to do. It needs to elevate the experience of the increasingly more boring museums with static displays and computer screens. This is how the next generation will learn history. They will touch it and feel it and lift it, hold the weapons, and hear veterans talk or reenactors explain what was. And this is every reason to show up to these events and many more. So thank you all, no matter how much complaining you may hear from your spouses. With all respect to the spouses, I love you too. Let them go, let them do it. History needs them. And to something different, a little further away, a place you have all heard of. You've seen it. You have heard of the strategic importance, the elevated position. You've heard of the Rangers' exploits scaling the cliffs to take this place, and the missing guns, and the heavy battle for the point to take it and hold it. But we can't go to the Macy Battery before we have visited Pointe du Hoc. Pointe du Hoc is a 30-meter-high cliff overlooking the English Channel, approximately 6.4 kilometers west of Omaha, 12 kilometers east of Utah Beach, about 20 kilometers from Bayonne. Its elevated position provided a commanding view of both invasion beaches, making it a prime defensive site, and one that had to be taken. The battery was initially equipped with 6 155mm French guns, captured in 1940, with a range of 20 to 22 kilometers, capable of targeting ships, troops on Utah and Omaha beaches. It was manned by approximately 125 to 200 personnel from the German Army's 352nd Infantry Division and some Kriegsmarine elements, under Lieutenant Hans Gruber and Major Fritz Siegelmann's oversight. Intelligence had suggested Pointe du Hoc was one of the most dangerous batteries in Normandy, prompting the daring assault by the U.S. 2nd Ranger Battalion on D-Day to neutralize these guns, which were feared to threaten the entire invasion. The site's rugged terrain and fortifications made that a formidable strongpoint. Here were two 𝐜𝐵𝐽𝐻 671 casemates, reinforced concrete 2 meter thick, for the 155mm guns, with steel shutters to protect against bombardment. 4 additional guns were initially in open concrete emplacements. 4 of the 6 155mm guns were in circular concrete pits, later partially replaced by casemates by 1944. These pits had ammunition niches and designed for a 360-degree traverse. Of course, the iconic fire control bunker, a concrete observation post on the very cliff's edge, equipped with rangefinders, communication systems, phone and radio. It was 3 meters thick walls and in a multi-level design, allowed precise targeting of ships up to 22 kilometers away. Here were lots of Trebrucks, small machine guns scattered across the site for perimeter defense. There were several 20mm Flak 30-38 guns and light machine guns to protect against air attacks. Yet I fail to understand why this place was not bristling with 88s. From April 1944, Allied air raids dropped over 1,000 tons of bombs and cratered this site, damaging 1 casemate and several trenches, but leaving the fire control bunker and most other structures intact. By June 1944, the battery was complete, with 4 casemates, 3 functional, 1 operational 155 gun on site. Unlike 𝐟𝐨𝐫𝐞 and 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐫𝐞, Pointe du Hoc had fewer extensive tunnels due to the smaller size, about 2 hectares. The planning began in 1941, with clearing of the 2-hectare site, leveling the ground, and installing 6 155 GPF French guns in open concrete emplacements. Basic trenches, barbed wire was laid to secure the perimeter. The battery was designed to interdict Allied ships and landings, complementing nearby batteries like 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐫𝐿 and Macy, 5 kilometers west of here. By mid-1942, 2 casemates were constructed to house the guns, replacing 2 open emplacements for better protection. The casemates were 2 meters thick concrete walls, ventilation systems, and adjacent ammunition storage. The fire control was then built on the cliff's edge in early 1943, with advanced optics for targeting. Its exposed position was offset by the thick concrete and low profile, and indeed it is still here today. By 1944, 2 additional open emplacements were replaced with casemates, bringing it to 4 total casemates and 2 open pits. However, only 3 casemates were fully operational by D-Day due to the bombing disruptions, with only 1 heavy gun in place. As in spring 1944, because of the threat of Allied air raids, 5 of the 6 guns were moved 1 kilometer inland to an orchard near 𝐶𝐸 in Bessin. The garrison was reduced to 125 men due to the guns' relocation, with some reassigned there. At 5:50 a.m., the 2nd Rangers, Company's DEF under Lieutenant Colonel James Rutter, scaled the 30-meter cliffs using ropes, ladders, grapples under heavy fire from machine guns and grenades thrown at them. The assault was supported by naval bombardment from USS Texas and Saddle, which targeted the casemates and fire control bunker. By 7:30, the Rangers had captured the battery, finding only 1 operational 155mm gun and decoys in all the other casemates. Thereafter, patrol was sent out to locate and disable the 5 other guns, which was found at the orchard and destroyed by using thermite grenades, neutralizing the battery's actual threat by 9 a.m. Mission complete. But then the 125-man garrison, supported by elements of the 352nd Infantry Division, counterattacked from bunkers and trenches. The Rangers, now reduced to 90 men by their casualties, held the position against repeated assaults, and also later from outside German forces. On June 7 and 8th, German counterattacks, supported by the nearby Macy battery, continued until June 8th, when the Rangers were finally relieved by the 116th Infantry Division and the 29th Division from Omaha Beach. The Rangers had suffered 135 killed and wounded, 60% of their force. German losses were approximately 50 killed and 40 captured. See if we have shrapnel on the walls here.
Il faudrait plus de déco.
The largest room here would be the map room, here behind the observation room. Next to that was 2 rooms with telephones, radio communication, and also from here they would communicate to the guns. And they were in communication to the guns behind the coastal road, those which had been moved before D-Day. However, they did have some problems with the comms, but they were established. Now, besides the actual invasion and the Rangers crawling up the cliffs outside, the German commanders here had another problem. The gunners for the guns which had been moved were drunk. Even when the Rangers got there, they found no sentries put up. These guys had been drinking all night and had clearly checked out of the war, not making things easier for the people in command here. And when the Rangers then attacked the observation post here, they did it from 2 directions. They threw charges through the observation slit here, and everybody fled into the main room. Then they fired a bazooka rocket at the rear defenses. Thereafter, the commanders locked themselves in the main room until they were out of ammunition, and then they eventually surrendered. There is some confusion as to exactly how many surrendered. The Rangers said they took 8 prisoners of war and 1 had been killed in the fighting, but there's some questions about that. I'm not entirely clear why. There was never supposed to have been any close quarter fighting or fires inside, although there are several places where the rooms look like they have seen signs of shrapnel and fire in the remains of the wood in the ceiling. I'm not entirely sure why. Again, we are said that 8 people have surrendered, 1 was killed, but there were probably more people in the bunker than 9 crew. Still not clear on this. I will have to get back to you. But the German morale here had taken several hits even before D-Day. In August 43, 1 of their men had been killed in an aerial bombardment. And later, in October 43, 2 small Allied crafts had been spotted way far out in the canal. And the then commander, Lieutenant Ebeling, he had decided that they were too far away to hit, and he did not open fire. This, 2 days later, earned him an interview without coffee, and he was relieved of command and on his way to the Eastern Front. That was bad for the morale, since he was a very well-liked commander. And then a few months later, the Americans showed up, and you know the rest. This is the remains of one of the casemates that was built here, and bombed, of course, but it was quite well intact, as we saw as long as Sumia. Despite the very heavy bombardment around, the physical building still remains. Of course, most of these places were empty of guns, but it still held up to quite a bit of damage, with 1 gun reasonably good shape. Everything else here is a completely overturned moonscape. Of all the heavy bombardments that has taken place here, you see it still to this day. It was also in one of these destroyed bunkers that the Rangers took up quarters and used as a field hospital and communication command post. During the fighting, they stood by for the 3 days that they were here. So even the ruins were somewhat useful, but it's amazing to see just how overturned and covered many of these positions are. It is amazing to think that the Germans were still capable of fighting from these in any which way. One could say that the Pointe du Hoc played less of a role in the D-Day landings as it was given the relocation of the guns, but it will forever remain an iconic symbol to the Rangers' heroics. Now, that leaves us with the 𝐬𝐫𝐸 battery, somewhat recently discovered or rediscovered and shrouded in controversy, but now, once again, it is firmly placed on the Normandy Battle of D-Day map. We'll go there next and hear the story from here. The 𝐬𝐫𝐸 battery located near Macy in Normandy, France. It's only a few miles from Pointe du Hoc. It was an extremely potent, well-armed fortress. It has 6 155 howitzers and 4 105 guns, a lot of anti-aircraft and even 88s. And Macy was noted on the Allied pre-invasion maps. It was constructed low to the ground, extremely well camouflaged, but it was known before D-Day. It was well known that it was a danger to the D-Day beaches as well, which proved well-founded concerns, for 3 days after the invasion, Macy was still shelling Omaha and Utah beaches, and shooting down Allied planes as well. It was only taken after a dedicated ground assault and over a 5-hour intense ground combat. Now, remember, 2 days before June 6th, 1,000 ground troops from the Luftwaffe had just arrived here as well. But after World War II ended, so did all mentions of Macy. It literally disappeared from history, and from Earth as well. It was physically covered up. Here's a Google image from 2004. There is nothing here. And it remained hidden until historian Gary Stern found it and began excavating it, something he's still doing. He also began having the documents released. With that, more questions were raised. Like, why was this battery allowed to shell the beaches for 3 days? And why did the Rangers not take it, or at least try to take it, after Pointe du Hoc? And could they have taken it if had been ordered to do so, or were they too committed with the German counter-assaults? Or were they ordered to do so at all? Or were they ordered to hold the road they took up? Was there a cover-up of events, and if so, why? We will talk to Gary about this in a moment, but first let's take a look at the battery. Macy Battery was designed as the coastal artillery strongpoint, like the others we visited, but larger and seemingly better armed. The battery itself comprised of 3 connected sites, designated by the Germans as WN-83, with 6 55mm French GPF howitzers housed in open emplacements and later partially enclosed in casemates, them we cannot find today. Then Widerstandsnest 84 with 4 105mm guns, like the Czech or French origin, also in open emplacements. And then on Fouché Farm were 4 105mm guns. These were supposedly destroyed by naval shelling on June 7th. Now, the fortifications, of course, included Regelbauten 671 for the 155 guns, though many of them remained in open pits due to the incomplete construction by the time of D-Day. The site, of course, features several ammunition bunkers, lots of personnel shelters, and a command post, trenches, and tunnels. In fact, over 2.5 miles of trenches which connected the bunkers and casemates and defensive positions. That facilitated secure movement. Now, some of these trenches were concrete-lined, and others were earth-supported. There was lots of Tobruks with MG-42s, and extensive barbed wire and minefields to protect the perimeter. Also, lots of anti-aircraft defenses, which included 20mm flak and 88mm. Battery's inland location, behind a rise, was enhanced by netting, foliage, painted structures, all to evade aerial detection. That made it nearly invisible to aerial reconnaissance. As we walk through the trenches today, it feels to me like these trenches were perhaps slightly lower today than then, or that the surrounding land was slightly lower, giving a better vantage points for opening fire positions. Macy served as the command hub for the sector. Housing is safe, with 4.2 million French francs, equivalent to $2 million today. That was for the Germans' payroll. These were supposedly discovered by the Rangers during the capture, that's what we're told, but none of that money has ever been found. I resolve to not have an opinion yet, but leave it all to you to look through the hundreds of pages of documents which has been released and compiled by Gary, who published 3 books on the matter. I have in fact never, in my life, seen a case as well documented as this one. Just saying. The construction began in early 1942 by the Toward Organization. The site was selected for its inland position, shielded from direct sea observation. On Light Point, the Hawks exposed cliffs. Initial work focused on clearing the 44-hectare site, digging trenches, laying foundations for the gun emplacements. By 1943, 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐜𝐫𝐢 83 saw the construction of the H671 casemates for some of the 155 howitzers, though only 2 were completed by the time of D-Day. 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐜𝐫𝐢 84 and the Fouché farm relied on open emplacements due to construction delays. In the command center, there was of course a radio room and the safe for the payroll. There was lots of barbed wire and minefields, which was later expanded to encircle all 3 sites, unifying them into one single fortified complex. By 1944, construction was still incomplete due to the Allied air raids and material shortage. Only 2 casemates had been fully operational by the time, with most guns still in the open, like this one, which was caught in the open during a low-altitude overflight by Allied aircraft. On June 4th, 1944, a full flak battalion and ground troops under Colonel 𝐾𝐨𝐧'𝐭 reported 1,000 ground troops. They arrived to reinforce the battery's defenses, likely in response to heightening Allied activity, so somebody was paying attention. Allied bombing intensified from April 44, targeting suspected positions, and on June 5-6, heavy air and naval bombardment caused minor damage but left the battery operational, thanks to its robust fortifications and again the camouflage.
Now the trenches are a little wider now that they've been dug up than they would have been at the time of the war, of course. And of course any fortress needs a water reservoir with a water pump, especially given the amount of people that was stationed here.
One thing I do enjoy going through this place is specifically that it is left the way it was found. It was covered up and it was found. Nothing has been restored, no fake artifacts have been put in place. It is simply a walk back in time.
What was interesting is, besides the hundreds of soldiers, the Air Force, the flak units, there was also SS units here. There were SS men fighting in Normandy during the D-Day invasions and the days after. It's long been claimed that there were no SS here, but there actually was. And there's also a lot of Czechs, Polish, Ukrainian soldiers that were here.
To me, it's just amazing that so many years after the battle was over, you're still able to dig up an entire fighting position just that had been lost to history, and yet here it is in the midst of a lot of growth. So good on Dan for actually discovering this place and bringing its history back to life.
And along the trenches are the ammunition storage leading up to the gun platforms. And as we leave the ammunition store, we come up to the only empty gun platform here, which is just a testament to how much work Gary put into this. It is now a family-owned location, which is amazing because it can be researched, it can be documented. And here you see the running trenches, and right here the body of a German officer was found and later reburied with full honors. It was found during the excavation of the gun pit and the trenches. All of this was covered up until Gary found it. It was one big field, just a field with a little bit of cement sticking up, which is where he finally found it, obtained the land, and started digging. With the ammunition pits down here. There's another shelter sitting in there along with one of the trenches. This place was just full of trenches. And the reason they know where the trenches was because of the change in the color of the soil as they excavated them. Which makes perfect sense, of course.
This is another ammunition store
To the MT gun platform. There's a lot of Tobruks, both standing independently and attached to the bunkers. I literally don't know. This is such a large place with so much to see that I don't even know where to start. There's a Tobruk up there as well. What makes this really interesting is there was a large radar here that was placed in this pit, which is not something you would normally see in relation to an artillery position. And here's one of the crew bunkers with a Tobruk on the side, and this was shot up, and the gunner of the Tobruk was killed here by an American armored car with a 105, and you clearly see how this would hit several times until the gunner of the Tobruk with the MG was killed. They fought for almost 6 hours here, and they didn't give up. There's one story of how an SS officer shot 2 German soldiers, probably Polish, less than volunteers, were shot for trying to surrender. And here you see the inside of the Tobruk with a shot that actually killed the gunner.
By D-Day, 𝐬𝐶 was sprawling and heavily defended. The battery was manned by approximately 400 troops from the 8th and 9th Battalion of the Artillery Regiment, which was part of the 352nd and 716th Infantry and Artillery Division, including the newly arrived 1,000 men from the Luftwaffe. Elements from the 352nd and 716th Infantry Division provided ground defense, manning the machine guns and Tobruks. Flak Regiment No. 1, with 12 𝐷8s and 20mm flak guns, protected for air attacks. That is a sizable number. Remember, not even at Point the Hawk was there a single 𝐷8. On June 6th, 𝐬𝐶's guns fired on Omaha Beach and Utah Beach, as reported by the 29th Infantry Division's D3 Journal. The 155 howitzers with a range of almost 12 kilometers could reach Omaha as well. The guns at Fouché's farm, the 150, they were destroyed by the USS 𝐼𝐶𝐬𝐿 on June 7th, reducing the battery's firepower by a third. On June 8th, General Omar Bradley ordered Colonel James Rudder, commander of the 2nd and 5th Ranger Battalions, to capture 𝐬𝐶. Rudder, who was wounded from Point du Hoc, deemed the 2nd Battalion combat inefficient. He assigned the 5th Ranger Battalion companies A, B, and C to lead the assault. They were supported by 2 half-tracks from the 2nd. On June 9th, the assault began with naval and artillery bombardment from the 58th Armored Field Artillery Battalion. The 5th Ranger, joined by elements of the 116th Infantry Regiment from the 29th, attacked the 44-hectare site. This battle lasted 5 hours, marked by intense fighting due to the complex trench network. This caused disorientation and friendly fire incidents as well. And remember, there were far more trenches and firing points than we can see now. The German defenders, including the Luftwaffe troops, all initially resisted and fought hard, but eventually, as the Rangers broke into the complex, aided by the fire from the half-tracks, it also appeared that here were SS officers on the location as well during the battle. Of course, the outcome we knew. The Rangers eventually captured 𝐬𝐶, taking 130 to 150 German prisoners. That is leaving almost 1,200 Germans to have retreated to fight another day, with about 75 killed. US casualties was approximately 18 killed or wounded. The battery's guns were either destroyed or disabled. And if you don't mind me saying so, the US casualties seems very low to me, given such a long battle. Typical crew bunker, simple, rudimentary, well protected, and you still see the wood in place here. When they excavated these, there was still wood on the walls, but of course by excavating it, it eventually deteriorated. You can see it was no longer protected by what kept it together. See the wooden dowels on the walls that would have, you put wooden siding inside here for insulation, for the echo, for general comfort. And of course in the winter it would be cold. You are also by the ocean, let's not forget. And here would have been the bunker oven that would have sat here, that was of course lost. And you just walk these trenches. This is really, really large. It's incredibly impressive how he put so much time and effort into clearing this for the sake of history. And in a small way, he sort of did rewrite a small part of history of D-Day, of the battle, of the reasoning, why things were done the way they were done. And it doesn't change the outcome of the war, of the battle, but it must be remembered for the sake of historical accuracy. And here you see ammunition shelters. The trenches were all lined with wood, and therefore when they were backfilled in the years after the war, it was fairly easy to distinguish where the original trench floor was. Of course, so people can walk through and actually see it, he opened it up a little bit more as one would. So you're looking at a row of munition stores, because down here you get to the next gun. And incidentally, the field hospital, which is another thing that was surprising at this location, is that there actually was a field hospital. Usually you wouldn't have field hospitals. You wouldn't have a field hospital in a system like this. And yet here it is. Can't go in there right now because the sides are somewhat collapsing. But there are several operating theaters in here that one day hopefully they'll get cleaned and we can get a little closer look at those. And this is what you would have seen some years ago, before Gary started finding the trenches and the bunkers. Of course, opening this up, telling the full story of what was here and why and how, that opened up a completely different can of worms.
My name's Gary Stern. I'm the owner of the 𝐬𝐵𝐷 battery in Normandy. It's a large German artillery position, headquarters, hospital, radar buildings, etc. And it's located near Omaha Beach, behind Omaha sector, along the coast. And a number of years ago, I've been asked many times how I found the place and uncovered it when it sort of didn't exist historically and people weren't writing about it and it wasn't in any books and it wasn't on the internet. And I came across a map in some trousers. I went to a show in Louisville, Kentucky, a military show, and under the table in one of the shows was a guy's kit and equipment in a cardboard box. So I asked the guy how much it was. I bought the box and brought it home, and when I brought it home I found that there was a paper map in the pocket of one of the trousers, and I looked at the area. It's an area of France I thought I knew quite well along the coast. I thought, well, there's nothing there, you know, this is just fields and it's just I don't know what's marked on the map, because it was marked with little cross hatches and it said area of high resistance, and that, it's not a descriptive term really, it's a non-descript term. It doesn't mean anything in particular. So I decided to come down the road one time when I was over here, and I could see all these fields with the rough ground and tall grass and stuff, and I decided to walk across the field. And at one point I came into a square of about 20 yards square of concrete, and I thought, oh okay, this is the floor of a building that's obviously been destroyed during a battle, or maybe the Navy blew it up, or the Air Force bombed it or something. And I thought, well, okay, it's interesting, you know, it's a piece of concrete, it's the floor of a building, that's that. I turned around to go back to the car, and I tripped up over a chimney pot. And then I realised, well, okay, maybe the building's beneath me. So I went home and came back with a shovel and went round the edge of the concrete until I found an area where water had been going into the ground, and I enlarged the space a little bit and crawled inside, and I found I was in an ammunition tunnel, and the ammunition tunnel was 30 or 40 yards long, and there was a couple of rooms for ammunition on one side and a fuse room on the other side, and the roof was really deep, so it was bomb-proof. So I thought, okay, why did the Germans build a bomb-proof tunnel for ammunition in the middle of nowhere? So a mile from the sea. So I started investigating, and over time I found a bit more concrete here, a bit more concrete there, and all sorts of other things. And on one occasion I found the centre spine for a field gun. And then, okay, I've found Tobruks, I've found for machine guns, I've found all these other objects, and then I found an ammunition store and a centre mount for a spine for a gun. So I contacted a lot of serious organisations in the States, in England, the Mayor's office here, historians. I was reading books about the area. The Atlantic War books had nothing in this area. So over a period of time I managed to be able to buy the land, and decided that, well, if nothing else, it'd be cool to dig the place up. So I started digging. After about 2 or 3 months, I was approached by a reporter from a major French newspaper, and he said, oh, I believe you found something interesting, because what was happening was every 50 metres, every 50 yards down a track or down a trench, we were following the existing trenches. We could see where the trenches had been filled in, and there was wood in the bottom of them. So we'd follow the trenches, every 50 metres, clunk, we'd hit another building or another piece of concrete. So we'd dig that out, we'd shovel the soil out from inside it, we found something else and something else. So we'd done about 2 miles of trenches, and this reporter approached me and he said, can I come and see what you've done? So I said, fine. He came to me the next day. The next day after that, he put me on the front page of the French newspapers, and then the day after that, the whole world descended on me. So every newspaper around the world came to see me and came to film what had been done. So you get some ludicrous newspapers who say, you know, English historian finds secret German love nest, or you get something else that will say, well, it's very interesting, but it's not historically interesting because nothing happened here, and so on. So we've got all these conflicting views from experts and people who've written lots of books about the subject who clearly had not found this place before. So the most interesting thing was, a few weeks later I got a phone call from a communication from a gentleman called Jack Burke. And Jack Burke, it turns out, was a combat medic with A Company of the 5th Rangers on D-Day, and he'd landed on Omaha Beach, as you would see in Saving Private Ryan. He got off the beach, he was involved in the relief of Pointe du Hoc, and he told me that this was one of the biggest battles that the Rangers did in Normandy, here, and he remembered it perfectly. So within a couple of weeks, him and his wife were on a plane out here. We walked the terrain. He told me all about the battle. He then gave me the number of a number of other guys who'd fought here. So he'd say, ring this guy, ring this guy, ring this guy. So over a period of time, I was able to write a book which became a bestseller in the States, a small paperback of their accounts, of really telling the extra part of the Rangers story in Normandy, which hadn't been told before. And over time, it's just expanded. In 2016, I found found out that the US Archives had released all their D-Day paperwork for the first time after the 60-year top secrecy rule plus a few years had elapsed. So I acquired all the Rangers paperwork, and on a day-by-day basis I built up a fully complete and accurate, only in the words from the archive and not from myself, but an accurate account of what actually happened in this area. And the stunning thing is that it has changed how a lot of people now write about this area and perceive this area, because one of the most interesting things was it proved that 𝐬𝐵𝐸 was actually a D-Day objective, not something to be attacked later. It was attacked late, it was attacked on the 9th of June, but the reality was it was a D-Day target for the Rangers, and that's opened up many questions historically about the figures concerned and why they didn't advance, why they stayed at Point Hoc. It's a mystery to us all now with the evidence that we have, and there's a number of things that have changed the narrative, but if nothing else, what we've done is we've added another piece to the history of the US Rangers, and a piece that shouldn't really be ignored. There was a lot of casualties from the Rangers here. Nobody was killed, not from the Rangers. There was a tank unit, 743rd Tank Battalion guy was killed on the land here in support of the Rangers, but there was quite a lot of Rangers wounded, and some of those were seriously wounded. You know, they weren't light wounds to be dismissed, they were serious. And really my sort of mission has been, since finding it and meeting all the Rangers over a long period of time, was to tell their story as accurately as could be done. And the only way you can do that is to get all of the evidence from the original sources, put it together, and then the physical evidence here is obvious, but then we married that all together, and we could say, you know, so and so did this, A company did this, B company did that, and we put together the whole history. Before I did it, nobody had ever said that 𝐬𝐵𝐸 existed, and the story of Point Hoc is becoming revised. I think that's probably the best way of putting it. It's a daring assault, and a lot of men died there, and there's no taking away the guys for that. But in actual fact, their missions went beyond Point Hoc. The reasons why the commanding officer ordered them to stay there is strange. I don't know. We haven't got an answer. We can't ask him now. It's a long time past, so we don't know the truth behind all of that. And there's a lot of supposition about, you know, they were beleaguered and they were pushed to the edges of the cliffs and stuff. But when you read a lot of the documentation that's available now, that narrative's a little bit different to that. So it's interesting. It's not about revisiting parts of history to sort of create strange amounts of change. It's just about saying, well, there's parts of this that we can tell more accurately, and history is all about being as accurate as we can, because if we're not accurate, then you know, it's not history, it's just fantasy, isn't it?
Nobody likes it when established history all of a sudden is questioned. Least of all those historians or professors who wrote books about this is how it was. Their books now needs to be rewritten, if you can make them change their mind, which rarely happens. D-Day was a real historical event. Munition store. You actually get lost here. And here we have one of the guns. The ammunition stores. Where else would you put it than exactly where it is supposed to be? And these were shelling the D-Day beaches for 3 days, until finally the Rangers moved up. After 3 days of firing, the Germans still had tons and tons of munitions left. I wonder what the events of D-Day would have been if the Rangers had been here on the first day. This was an objective that should have been taken on the first day of D-Day.
Macy's shelling of Omaha and Utah beaches from June 6th to 8th, that did disrupt Allied operations, particularly on Omaha's western sector. One could say that given the armament here, the capture and destruction of this place would have been far more important than that of Pointe du Hoc. And the battery's burial by U.S. forces post-war, erasing it from the landscape, that fueled speculations about a cover-up to hide the strategic errors made. Stern explains that declassified U.S. Army orders from March 26, 1944 directed the 2nd Ranger Battalion to capture Pointe du Hoc, then advance and capture Macy to neutralize their batteries. He argues that Colonel Rudder disobeyed these orders by remaining at Pointe du Hoc in order to hold the 𝐬𝐵𝐽 highway, allowing Macy's guns to fire for 3 days. No orders to hold the highway have been found in the U.S. archives. The evidence for this, Stern cites, is the intelligence dossier, the RAF reconnaissance photos, and the 1st Infantry Division's orders naming Macy as a Ranger target. Allied codes 516, 16A for Les Perroux, Le Maritier, and Fouché Farm. Major Cleveland Life, a Ranger officer, namely objected to the Pointe du Hoc mission, believing Macy was the real threat, but he was removed before D-Day. In analyzing this, the orders to capture Macy exists, but their priority is unclear. Rudder's decision to hold Pointe du Hoc may simply reflect battlefield realities. For instance, the heavy German counterattacks for 3 days, and having 77 Rangers killed and 152 wounded men. The cover-up claims really relies heavily on the burial and the lack of historical mention, but no direct evidence links this to Eisenhower or high-level orders. And the Rangers' heroics at Pointe du Hoc, where they disabled the 5 guns in the orchard, that may simply have overshadowed Macy's roles in the official mentions. Still, it is strange.
And of course, connected to the ammunition bunker is a small brook. Close defensive point. Fire over the fields. Another one of the gun positions. And of course, the roofs of some of these have been covered up, and some of them have been destroyed. It's just amazing to see it still here in place. To think he found this not that many years ago, and that sort of gives every one of us historians hope that there's still a lot more to find. I believe there's a lot more hiding under the ground. This was a location taken by the Allies. It's a well-known location, well documented, and yet it never appeared in a history book or really on the maps until a decade ago. Saving Private Ryan was not about getting the guys up here, it was about getting them off the beach, practically. And that's what that was. The Longest Day mentions this place slightly. So it did exist in memory and knowledge, but it was never really given the credit for the damage and carnage it caused on the D-Day beaches. Or it was never questioned why it was not taken out of commission sooner, as it most likely should have been. Love these little shelters. This is pretty much all there is. I would imagine this is where you'd have kept the fuses. To pull above a rail that was embedded here once. There's the officers' building. Not the most reinforced place in the world, but this was for peacetime commander's office, right next to the tunnel, with more shelters inside, munition stores inside. defensive position. This is a real place. This is not just fun and games. This was really built to defend and to fight from. This was a fighting position. See the emplacement for wood on the walls. I suppose it could be emergency exit, although we are at ground level. Wood in the roof here. This is out of stone, out of cement, with the ceiling, low ventilation. This is the tunnel Gary found first. What a surprise that must have been. And I think we all sort of have a hope that one day we'll find a tunnel too. Somewhere, if we dig long enough, there'll be a tunnel hiding somewhere underneath our feet. I think that's every historian's dream. Every historian's dream is to find that underground hidden location that hasn't been seen since the time of whatever conflict created it. Another compartment in here. Animal shelter. Get out on the other side. Look at how well built this is. Right here is the cannon. Here's the commander's office.
Stern explains that Allied intelligence knew Point-de-Hock's guns were moved 500 meters inland before D-Day, making the Rangers' assault unnecessary. 𝐬𝐶, with its operational guns, was the real threat, but was ignored due to German deception, such as the decoy guns still at Point-de-Hock. But where did we know that the Point-de-Hock guns had been moved, and how did we know the Allies knew at the time? The evidence for this was RAF photos, and reports identified 𝐬𝐶, but its camouflage obscures its full extent. Point-de-Hock's prominence on Allied maps reflects German efforts to portray it as the primary target, possibly a deliberate decoy by Rommel. Allied intelligence lightly underestimated 𝐬𝐶, but was not entirely ignorant of it, it is mentioned. The focus of Point-de-Hock reflects its perceived strategic value, not a deliberate oversight of 𝐬𝐶. Stern claims of a decoy are plausible, but lack definitive proof on a high-level intent. Claims that the U.S. forces buried 𝐬𝐶 under 1 to 3 meters of soil post-war to erase evidence of an intelligence failure. A 2008 report in the Telegraph claims that Rangers found 4.2 million French francs, which they divided amongst themselves, suggesting a motive to suppress the site's significance. Additionally, Stern notes that a Ranger was court-martialed after the 𝐬𝐶 battle, possibly noted to the money or misconduct, hinting at hidden scandals there. Now, I do not really want to get into this argument personally, as I simply do not have the overview yet. However, I will try to get Gary with us on a live chat so he can explain it to us for himself. He have, after all, researched all of this in depth and spoken to every surviving ranger he possibly could find who was there. I do want to note one thing. I have seen nothing that tampers with or knocks the heroics of the rangers of those days. And I do not want to double-guess anybody who was there, since I certainly was not. But after spending several hours with Gary, having him lay out the entire chain of events from month to month before D-Day, day to day, it does seem something is going on here. And also, again, he has met with every surviving ranger who was there.
Là, là-bas. Il y a encore un 32 et après on devra revenir ici pour aller vers le 33. Oh, attends.
Seems appropriate as being overflown by period aircraft.
And another nice thing here is that, let's just face the facts, no one would be here for a D-Day celebration if it hadn't been for the fact that the Germans were here first. Well, the French were here first technically, then the Germans were here, and you know what I mean. So finding a group of German reenactors here in Normandy is actually quite nice, because, like I said, you wouldn't be here if they hadn't been here. And having them show all their uniforms and everything the way it was and what they would wear also gives you an insight. There's plenty of Americans and British and Canadian equipment to see here, but the German stuff is somewhat underrepresented. So I want to give my thanks to these cool guys from France who showed me all their stuff and told us the story of where it came from and how it came to be. Well done.
So here we have a presentation of the German uniforms, so the evolution during the war, and then personal equipment, gears, and to finish weapons. So for the uniform, at the beginning of the war, Germans won M36 jackets, and it was it looks very rich. I mean, sophisticated pockets and shiny shoulder
Embroidery, shoulder boards.
a very great uniform. In 1940, we have the M40 jackets, and we still have sophisticated pockets, and for the shoulder is sober. And in 1943, Germany had not much money, so they simplified the jackets, and even for particularly the pockets. And in 1944, we have the M44 jackets, and we just cut the bottom of the jackets. And this jacket took inspiration from the English battle dress.
So that was standard with a short jacket?
Yes, at the end of the war, yes. Because for economy, even for shoes. At the beginning of the war, Germans wore boots, and at the end they worn just shoes with gaiters, because to make a shoes is less expensive in leather than a boot.
Yeah.
And here we have some nails, and the purpose of the nails was to make the shoes more durable.
Better grip.
Yes, better grip, but
you can have a better grip, but the shoes, this part of the shoes will...
against wear, so they would last longer.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. So it's the nail that will be used before the rest of the leather.
Because iron is stronger than leather, and when the nail is broken, we just have to replace it. And for example, for your shoes, when they are, comment on dit une semelle?
Worn out.
When your sole is dead, is worn off, you have to just buy another pair of shoes. Here, we just have to replace the nails.
So this is the personal items that German soldiers have every day on his equipment. So the first one is the dog tag. It's like the same of the US dog tags. The only part there is one plate. When the soldier died, we broke this plate and take the bottom one, and this plate rest on the soldiers. But there is some difficulties, and that's why some German soldiers were unknown. Because here we have a number. It's the first unit when the soldier comes to the regular army. It's the first unit when it's affected on. So to find his identities, we need to have his soulbook. It's the paybook. And the number of the dog tags is here. But if we don't have it, the soldier just rests unknown.
So you're saying the dog tag number is not registered in Berlin or the Central Archives? Or the personnel?
It could be difficult because during the bombings, some records could be destroyed and everything. Yeah. And at the end of the war, German authorities don't have the same amount of personnel and everything to find unknown soldiers. Here you have the small first aid kit that we can find inside a jacket. Like here, we have a small pocket to put the first aid kit inside. So after we have razor and where is it? And razor blades, cigarette paper. Yeah.
So all these things, were that soldiers, would they get them themselves, or was that issued?
Some parts are issued, like first aid kit, razor, forks and everything, and they come to buy because they are paid for. They come bought some equipment to have a better life in the front line. So you have here the underwear, and this is the swimsuit.
Charming.
Yeah. A towel, some socks here, the water bottle single, and this is the water bottle. You have a small car inside to drink. Mm-hmm. The hole outside the water bottle is made for thermal exchange, because when you pour it in water, the water inside will be fresh all the day. Here we have the cleaning kit of the rifle with some cotton. Yeah, here comes the oil
and the
snake. Yeah, the snake, and some brush.
It's funny.
Yeah.
50 years after the war, 60, I was issued the G3.
Yeah.
With the almost identical cleaning kit.
Yes, it's the same. Yeah, yeah. German soldiers tell us that it's still the same.
Yeah.
But no, the oiler is in plastic.
It is in plastic, a little plastic with a lid. That's true.
This is the flashlight. So you have the flashlight, regular flashlight, and during the night, if there is enemy airplanes or everything, you can cover and still have some lights. And this is the small wood for the tents. So you need to have the 𝐟𝐨𝐫𝐷. It's a triangular piece of tissue that every soldier have, and for sleeping you need to find some friends and put in common the 𝐬𝐫𝐷.
Yep.
Yeah.
You tie yours into his.
Yeah,
and,
yeah, and you can sleep.
Same thing today.
The most common part, as you can see on the entry, there was 8. The big one was 8 places for 8 soldiers, and the small one is 4 for 4 soldiers. When you take when you fold correctly the 𝐬𝐵𝐷, you can make a poncho like this. And you will have camouflage. So, yeah. After that, I just forget to talk about backpacks. So the first backpack that we can find at the beginning of the war is the tornister. It's an heritage from World War I with some cow leather, and inside you have all the place to put your equipment. But this is really expensive to produce, so they use the 𝐵𝐻𝐭. It's a triangular piece of tissue, and on it you can clothes. You can make on it your 𝐬𝐵𝐷, the mess kit, and the coat. Yeah.
So that's the grey coat.
Yeah, the great coat. And for longer time of marching or everything, you have the rucksack. This is this part with more clothes, more equipment, more food, etc. And the 𝐵𝐻𝐭 can go on it too. So we have 60 rounds into 6 ammo pouch. So you have 2 5-round clips inside every pouch. US soldiers have at least 80 rounds on it, German 60. You will find a shovel, 2 types of shovel. The first one is
Folding shovel.
Yeah, folding shovel. It was invented by the Germans in 1934, and the US forces, when they found this in 1943, developed their own folded. So in France, we call that the US shovel, but in true, this is the German that invented this. But it's really expensive to produce, so they just made regular shovel. On it, you can find the Seitengewehr, the bayonet. It looks like the same that World War I, but just a little bit smaller.
They started the war very much with a lot of World War I equipment.
Probably the same, almost.
Yes, like for the US, when you take a look on US troops in 1940 or 1941, they still have some gears from World War I. For an example, the Dove Boys, the M1917 helmets are still the same after the World War I and before the World War II, and then it was replaced by M1 helmet. And something interesting about the bayonets, bayonets are not chops, and it's for one reason. I think you eat meat. When you cut the meat, you are making a perfect cut. But a perfect cut inside the body is very easy to repair. But if it is not chopped, you can scratch the skin, and it is harder to repair. Because the purpose behind the bayonet is to kill. And another thing is, do you see this part of the bayonet?
As we call the blood groove?
Yes, that's it. When the bayonet is inside the body, it favors bloodless, and it is more deadly.
And it'll get stuck if there's no groove for the vacuum.
Yeah. The last part is the bread bag, the bread bag. So you have everything that you need for 24 hours to be alone. 24 hours. We can see, we can hold it, the water bottle, and on this place, the mess kit. To support all the equipment, we have the Y strap. It's just regular strap that you can attach behind the pouch, like this. Yeah.
The Y strap.
Yeah.
Yep.
Y strap, yeah. I said it in French, sorry. And the last one is the mag. Because World War I and the gas during the trench war is very, very a big fear for soldiers of World War II. So they just have this one. Yeah. Yeah. Here we come. Yeah. And you have a cartridge just here, like this.
Is that original?
I don't know. I don't think. It's probably an original, but
yeah, because usually the repros don't have the orange, the yellow glass.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll take very good care of it. And of course, I have my folding shovel in my car.
So we have this one. It's 25 kilos of 2 to 3 kilometers of cable to put phone in communication. So yeah.
I was a private soldier once myself, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
And we got started with the old field phones and the old. They're not much different. They look a little different, but they're pretty much the same.
It's funny to see people. Oh yeah, it's just the back broke because it's too heavy.
They complain way too much.
Yeah.
Before I talk about jackets, but it is the same thing for caps. Here we have a garrison cap, and we have the Prussian colors, black, white, and red, and so the eagle and the swastika, and a color and a color here. It's orange for military police. Here we have yellow for transmissions, white for infantry, red for artillery, etc., etc. And for the garrison cap, it is made for cold weather. We can unfold the garrison cap and protect the ears. And during the on the Eastern Front, it was not enough because soldiers need to be protected from cold around the mouth and cheeks. So we have the 1940 garrison cap. They found a solution, and here my hairs are protected, my cheeks too, and I just have to close here, and all of my face is protected from cold.
It looks period. It looks period. Now this is what I really enjoy, is to run into military historical reenactors. For every war, every battle, every period, you need people doing living history. And for the German side too, even though it is partially banned here from Normandy, let's face it, none of the other reenactors would be here if the Germans hadn't been here first. It's just amazing to imagine that all this was covered up and missing from history for so many years, just not here. This is the large command bunker. And because it was hidden for so many years, it still has a lot of the original components, like the floor. Again, that's one thing you don't see very often. bunker. I don't remember seeing that last time I was here. They're still uncovering bunkers for this position. That there is so much more to see when it comes to World War II, that even fighting positions, not just hidden underground factories, are missing and lost to history. Fighting positions, bunkers, not just factories and strange secret projects. You also have actual fighting bunkers that's been lost. You really can easily get lost in here. I give you the same idea. If you were an American attacking this place, you would get lost in here too, because it's a bit of a maze. But it's not like the Americans didn't know it was here. It just sort of fell off the radar. So when you look at this, you have to ask yourself, if all this is hiding, or was hiding under here, things like these could be hiding anywhere. And of course these would be proper trenches that'll be shored up on the sides and so on, protected with camouflage netting above, covering all of them. But like I said, they were a known entity. But are you going to keep excavating as much as you can, see what more there is to find?
We are doing slowly. There are other elements that we haven't finished yet. There's an area just close to where we've just been that I'm going to do in the near future. So it will keep expanding within the confines of the land that we have. The site during the war was 144 acres. So it's not small. It was a big site, and there was 3 gun batteries within that, and then it was defended by a huge amount of artillery, anti-aircraft artillery on the 5th of June onwards. So there was no shortage of defence. The Germans didn't want it captured because it covered the bottom of Utah and the west of Omaha Beach, and certainly a lot of Omaha sector. So it was an important position for the Germans, and they carried on fighting for it for 3 days after D-Day. So they fired on D-Day at the Allies' landing, but then it continued to fire on the 7th, 8th and 9th of June until the Rangers came in here. And talking to some of the guys from the Rangers, it was the first time they'd been told to fix bayonets, because they were literally face to face with the enemy in trenches. It wasn't a case of oh, the enemy's over that hill somewhere, we can shell him. This was face to face in trenches and tunnels and bunkers.
And the day before, it was by accident just reinforced by 1,000 more guys from a Luftwaffe regiment.
Yeah, a flak unit from the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, was sent here to guard it with 1,000 men, and that's a huge amount of men and material. And they set up in the perimeter because they were expecting. They were seeing regular overflights of this area by the RAF and the US Air Force, and I think they were expecting an attack on this area very soon, so they were preparing for that. And purely coincidentally, they had no idea D-Day was going to be the next morning, so when it arrived, it was a big shock for them. And they were expending a lot of men during that. At one point, they were losing 50 men an hour. So that's quite an attritional rate for any unit to try and sustain. But they continued to knock down the planes. There was quite a number of RAF and US Air Force planes. So it was effective in its job, which was to try and repel the navies from getting too close to this area, keep the beaches as clear as it could, but you can't do everything at the same time. So the anti-aircraft guys were firing upwards, the artillery's trying to hit the beach. We've got reports of the evening of D-Day, 8 o'clock at 8:40 at night. The Navy are saying, 𝐬𝐶's firing on Utah Beach, for example. So those, the gunners here were professionals of their time, and they would have done, I think they would have done a lot of, would have attempted to stop the enemy, as in the Allies, coming off the beaches, and they didn't give up for a few hours on D-Day and then call it a day. And interestingly, there's an engineer's report for the tunnel that we've just walked through, and they said after the battle they found 180 tons of ammunition still in the tunnel. So when you read something like that, and the place was still firing for 3 days, had the Rangers not come here and dealt with it, it could have fired for another 3 days, and how many more people could it have killed? So they had to get here, they had to deal with it. They didn't get here on D-Day as ordered, but that's, you know, for various reasons. But when they did get here, it was a 5.5-hour battle, and it was hard work for them. And, you know, well done them.
I mean, you can hide things from aerial reconnaissance, but certain things do stand out a bit. Of course, this is a regular field effleurage sitting on here. To me, in Normandy, this is one of the most interesting places to visit because it's kept almost original. It's not a big, fancy, loud museum, and this gives you a really good idea as to what a German fighting position, combat position here looked like and felt like as you go through it and get lost.
Not done with Macy. By far, we probably will be back and we will have to talk to Gary. But there's many, many more battlefields and fortresses and forts out there for me to show you. So, thank you for D-Day month, and let's move on and see what else was there to see. I hope you'll consider subscribing to my channel, liking, follows, and maybe even join me on Patreon to help out. I am just a guy, a historian, traveling around all these historic places in Europe on my own dime, trying to bring them to you.